Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History for Deep Rest. Tonight we step carefully onto a narrow Viking longship as the last of the daylight drains from a cold northern sky, and you are already wondering how on earth anyone managed to sleep out here without turning into a human icicle. The sea stretches in every direction, dark and patient, and the hull beneath your boots feels thin enough to make you question every life choice that led you here. You probably would not survive this, at least not without several thermal blankets and a heated mattress pad. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you are in the world and what time it is there right now. I love imagining this little circle of listeners drifting off together across different time zones. Now dim the lights and let your eyes soften as you stand on the deck of a longship somewhere in the North Atlantic, perhaps in the 9th century. The wind smells faintly metallic like salt and wet iron. It combs through your hair and slips down the collar of your tunic with icy fingers. Beneath you, the ship shifts and breathes, wood flexing with each swell. There is no cabin waiting below deck, no cozy bunk tucked behind a door, just open sky and a hull barely higher than your waist. A broadly accepted historical understanding tells us that Viking longships were clinker-built, meaning the planks overlapped like scales fastened with iron rivets. This design made them light, flexible and fast. It also meant they were open vessels without permanent enclosed sleeping quarters for the crew. You glance around and realise that when night falls you will not be descending into a warm room. You will be negotiating with the elements directly. The deck is narrow. Shields line the sides hung along the gunwales, their painted faces turned outward like a row of quiet guardians. Oars rest in their thole pins ready for the next command. Everything has a purpose tied to movement and survival. Comfort is not on the list. It seeps upward through the soles of your feet. The chill of the sea is in your bones. It is a memory of the sea, a memory of the sea, a memory of the sea seeps upward through the soles of your boots and into your bones if you stand still too long. Imagine lying down here, your cheek pressed to a plank that has known nothing but wind and spray for days. And yet they did lie down here, again and again. There is a quirky detail that sometimes surprises people. Many crew members kept their personal belongings in wooden sea chests which doubled as benches during the day. At night, those same chests could serve as a raised surface to lean against or even stretch out upon, keeping a body slightly off the damp floorboards. It was not luxury, but it was strategy. A few inches above the deck could mean the difference between merely cold and dangerously chilled. As twilight deepens, you notice how the crew moves with practiced efficiency. Cloaks are adjusted, bundles are shifted. There is no dramatic announcement that it is bedtime. Instead, it happens gradually. The man beside you yawns, rubs his beard and lowers himself against his chest. Another unrolls a folded hide. Someone else remains upright near the stern eyes on the horizon. Historians still argue whether longships ever carried small temporary tents made from the sail itself while at sea, or if that was primarily done when anchored near shore. The evidence is not entirely clear. Some sagas hint at awnings being rigged, while archaeological remains remain stubbornly silent on the finer details of canvas arrangements. You look up at the great woolen sail now lowered and bundled. Could it become a roof for the night, or would it remain lashed tight until morning? The sea answers none of these questions. It simply keeps moving. You kneel and test a spot near the midship area. The planks are damp from spray. Salt crystals catch faint lights sparkling like frost. You imagine unfastening your cloak thick and heavy with lanolin-rich wool. Wool is the quiet hero of this story. It traps heat even when wet, a property modern outdoor brands still boast about. Viking clothing was not flimsy. Tunics, trousers, cloaks, often layered, created a barrier between skin and sea air. You sit down back against your sea chest and pull your cloak tight. The fabric smells faintly of sheep and smoke from earlier campfires. Not unpleasant, earthy, real. Your knees rise toward your chest to conserve warmth. Around you, bodies arrange themselves in similar poses, shoulders nearly touching. No one pretends they prefer distance. Heat is shared currency out here. The ship rocks gently now, not violently, just enough to remind you that the ground is never still. Each creak of timber is a lullaby of sorts. You might think it would be impossible to sleep with that constant motion. But exhaustion is persuasive. After hours of rowing, hauling ropes, scanning horizons, your muscles hum with fatigue. Your eyelids grow heavy despite the cold. A common misconception paints Vikings as impervious to discomfort, as though they were somehow immune to temperature. They were not. They felt the same bite of wind that you do now. The difference lay in adaptation and expectation. If you grow up in a landscape of long winters and icy fjords, your baseline for what counts as tolerable shifts You learn early that warmth is managed, not assumed. The man on watch shifts his weight. His silhouette stands against a fading stripe of orange along the horizon. He will not sleep yet. On long voyages, a rotating watch system kept someone alert at all times. Tonight it is his turn to trade rest for vigilance. Later, perhaps you will take his place while he curls up against the hull. You lie down slowly, testing the angle so that your hip bone does not press too sharply against wood. There is no pillow. Perhaps you fold a spare tunic beneath your head. The air tastes briny. A stray droplet of spray lands on your cheek and cools instantly. You think of warm beds in modern houses, insulated walls, central heating humming quietly in the background. It feels almost comical to compare. And yet here you are, discovering that survival at sea is less about heroic toughness and more about small repeated decisions. Where you place your body, how tightly you wrap your cloak, whom you lie beside to borrow a little warmth. The sky above darkens fully now. Stars begin to appear faint at first, then sharper. The North Atlantic stretches beneath them like black silk. The longship glides onward, a narrow thread stitched across a vast expanse. You pull your cloak closer, feel the steady rhythm of the hull beneath you, and let your breathing match the rise and fall of the sea. Cold remains, it does not vanish, but it becomes something you coexist with rather than fight. And as your eyes drift closed, you realize this is only the beginning. The ship itself, built for speed and sudden landings, holds more secrets about how sleep was carved out of such unforgiving space. The hull continues to murmur beneath you, and by the time the faintest grey light touches the horizon again, you understand something important. This ship was never meant to cradle your dreams, it was meant to slice through water. You sit up slowly, joints stiff from the night's compromise with timber and salt air. Around you men stretch, roll their shoulders and adjust cloaks. No one comments on how they slept. There is no scale of comfort to compare against. A simple unspoken truth guides the morning. You're alive, you're still moving, that's enough. A well-established historical fact is that Viking longships were engineered primarily for speed, shallow draft, and surprise landings. Their sleek shape allowed them to navigate rivers as easily as open sea. They could beach directly onto sand without the need for docks. This design revolutionized mobility during the Viking Age, enabling rapid raids and long-distance trade, but nowhere in that list of priorities do you find the word comfort. You run your fingers along the curve of the hull again, noticing how thin the planking feels. The overlapping boards, fastened with rivets and sealed with tarred fibres, flex slightly as the ship rides each swell. That flexibility kept the vessel from snapping in heavy seas. It also meant that the interior space remained open and exposed. There were no enclosed cabins below deck, because there was no true below deck in the way you might imagine on later medieval ships. The deck itself is essentially the interior. You live on top of the ship, not inside it. There is a curious detail that sometimes escapes modern imagination. Some longships likely carried removable deck boards that could be lifted to access storage space beneath. This area was used for supplies, ballast stones, or cargo, but it was not a cosy lower sleeping chamber. It was cramped, dark, and often damp. You would not voluntarily crawl down there for rest unless conditions above were unbearable. You glance toward the prow, where the carved head rises fierce and stylized. It looks dramatic, almost theatrical, yet its presence reminds you that this vessel is an extension of identity and intimidation. It is built to project power, not to coddle its crew at night. Historians still argue whether crews preferred to sleep primarily on land whenever possible, rather than aboard ship even during relatively short voyages. The sagas suggest frequent beachings, while some archaeological interpretations imply that longer stretches at sea were unavoidable. You can feel the debate in your bones as you consider the difference between drifting offshore in cold spray and pulling the ship onto a quiet strand where a fire could be lit. The wind freshens slightly, brushing your face with cool insistence. You notice how the sides of the ship offer minimal protection. The gunwales rise only so high. When waves slap against them, droplets arc inward and settle wherever they please. Shields hung along the sides do provide a modest windbreak. Their curved surfaces interrupt gusts and reduce direct spray. But they are not walls, they are suggestion. You picture yourself trying to design a sleeping space here. Where would you begin? There is no spare room to partition, no beams to hang thick curtains from. Every inch is claimed by function. Oars must be accessible. Ropes must remain coiled and ready. The mast stands at the centre like a spine. You cannot simply sprawl. So you adapt. You learn to sleep in segments in compact shapes. You tuck your limbs inward to preserve warmth and space. You accept that someone's elbow may rest against your ribs. You accept the smell of damp wool, tar, and unwashed bodies. It becomes background rather than offence. There is also the matter of balance. A longship is sensitive to weight distribution. If too many bodies cluster on one side of the vessel lists, this practical reality shapes how you arrange yourselves at night. You cannot all huddle wherever feels most sheltered. You must consider the ship's equilibrium. Even rest becomes a collective calculation. The sea itself plays a role in your education. On calm nights, when the surface lies almost glassy, sleeping aboard feels nearly peaceful. The ship glides with a gentle rocking that might even soothe you. But when swells build and the wind shifts, the hull begins to rise and fall more sharply. You wake instinctively to sudden tilts, bracing yourself against sliding. A lesser-known anecdote from experimental archaeology offers a small insight. Modern crews who have sailed reconstructed longships report that after several days the constant motion becomes strangely familiar. The body adjusts, muscles learn to anticipate shifts, sleep while light still comes. It is not luxurious, but it is possible. You stand now as the morning brightens, watching crew members prepare for rowing. The sail remains bundled for the moment. Oars slide into place with a rhythmic clack, hands grip wood worn smooth by generations. The night's stiffness dissolves into purposeful movement. There is a quiet lesson here. When a vessel is built for speed and sudden manoeuvring, everything extraneous is stripped away. The absence of comfort is not neglect. It is trade-off. You sacrifice softness for agility. You surrender insulation for shallow draft. The ship's very brilliance depends on its austerity, and yet human beings are endlessly inventive. Within this stripped-down environment, you will discover ways to carve out small pockets of survivable rest. You will use clothing-shared warmth, clever positioning and timing to negotiate with cold air and wet planks. As the first synchronized pull of oars sends the ship forward, you feel the muscles in your back engage. The rhythm is steady, almost meditative. Each stroke generates heat. Physical labor, relentless as it is, becomes part of the solution. By the time evening returns, your body will be so thoroughly worked that sleep will not need luxury to persuade you. You glance once more at the open deck, imagining how it will look under starlight again. Built for speed, yes. Built for sudden landings and swift departures, but also in its own stark way built to hold the fragile act of human sleep against all odds. The shoreline lies faint in the distance now, a smudge between sea and sky. Whether you reach it before nightfall or remain upon open water will shape how you rest next. And already you sense that the narrow spaces between sea chests and shields will become even more important when darkness returns. By the time the sun arcs higher and then begins its slow descent again, you have found yourself studying the objects around you with new appreciation. The longship may not offer cabins or bunks, but it does offer something subtler. It offers surfaces, edges, corners, hard lines that with a little imagination can become places of rest. Your sea chest sits where you left it, wedged securely near your rowing position. During the day it serves as your seat. You perch on it while gripping the oar spine, bent forward, legs braced against the crossbeam. Inside it holds your spare tunic, perhaps a small whetstone, maybe a wooden comb, a few personal items that remind you that you are more than muscle and salt spray. A commonly accepted historical detail explains that each crew member often brought such a chest aboard. These were not identical factory-made boxes. They varied in size and carving, some plain, some decorated. The chest was your portable world, compact and practical, and when night returned it transformed. You lower yourself onto it now as evening approaches, testing its stability. The wood is solid beneath you, raised slightly above the deck planks. That elevation matters. The deck absorbs moisture from the sea, and even when no wave breaks over the side, condensation and spray linger. Lying directly on those boards invites cold to creep steadily into your body. A chest, even a narrow one, interrupts that exchange. There is something almost tender about this small adaptation. You do not have a mattress, but you do have ingenuity. You notice how the chests are arranged in a loose pattern along the length of the ship, each near its owner's rowing place. This unspoken order shapes the sleeping arrangement. No one argues over space because space is already defined by daily labour. You sleep where you row. The rhythm of the day dictates the geometry of the night. A quirky tidbit sometimes mentioned in maritime studies suggests that some sea chests may have been slightly curved on the lid, not just for aesthetics but to shed water more easily. Imagine that subtle curve beneath your back as you recline. Not exactly ergonomic by modern standards, but thoughtfully designed for life at sea. You lean back against your chest and draw your knees up. The mast looms nearby, thick and reassuring. Ropes hang coiled like resting serpents. The shields along the gunwales catch the last slanting light, their painted surfaces dulled by use. You choose your angle, carefully aware that if you lie too flat, you may slide when the ship rolls. Historians still debate whether Vikings used additional wooden planks laid temporarily across sea chests to create broader sleeping platforms. There is no definitive evidence of widespread use, but experimental sailors have tried such arrangements during reconstructions. Some find it plausible. Others argue that space constraints would have made it awkward. You imagine a few boards bridging the gap between chests, creating a slightly wider surface. It would not be comfortable, but it would be clever. Around you, others begin the same quiet preparations. Cloaks are unfurled. A folded hide appears from inside a chest, its fur side turned upward. Someone shakes out a spare tunic and spreads it beneath his hips. These gestures are small, almost invisible against the vastness of sea and sky. But they are acts of survival. You sit sideways on your chest first, then pivot so that your back rests against the inside of the hull. The wood curves, gently offering a kind of cradle if you position yourself just right. Your shoulder blades find a hollow between rivets. You adjust until the pressure feels manageable. The smell here is distinctive. Tar used to seal the planks mingles with salt and wool. There is a faint metallic tang from the rivets, warmed slightly by the day's sun. Beneath it all lies the scent of human presence, sweat dried and rehydrated by spray. It is not unpleasant once you surrender to it. It simply is. You glance at the narrow strip of deck still visible between bodies and chests. There is little wasted space. Even lying down, you remain alert to the limits of your surroundings. An elbow here, a knee there. You coordinate unconsciously with your neighbours, shifting inches to accommodate one another. This closeness is not merely practical, it is protective. If a sudden lurch threatens to unseat you, a shoulder presses back. If a wave splashes over the side, you absorb some of it together. The sea chest anchors you physically, but the human presence anchors you emotionally. A lesser-known note from saga literature hints that personal belongings were deeply valued on voyages. Losing a chest overboard could mean losing tools, clothing, even precious heirlooms. So at night, your body does double duty. You are not only resting on your chest, you're guarding it. Your weight keeps it from shifting too easily if the ship pitches sharply. You lie back now, head resting on your folded cloak atop the chest lid. The stars prick the darkening sky once more. The horizon is a thin silver line. The cold begins its slow return, creeping across the deck as the day's warmth dissipates. You shift slightly and feel the reassuring solidity beneath you. Hard, yes, but elevated. Separate from the damp boards below. It is astonishing how much difference a few inches can make when the temperature drops. There is no illusion of privacy. You can hear the breathing of the man beside you. Slow, steady. You sense his weight against his own chest, mirroring your posture. Somewhere near the stern, the watchman clears his throat softly. Your world has narrowed to this rectangle of wood beneath you, this circle of sky above, and the rhythmic sigh of water along the hull. You understand now that sleeping aboard a longship is less about finding comfort and more about claiming territory within constraints. The sea chest is your claim, your boundary, your modest elevation above the cold. As your eyelids grow heavy again, you feel the ship glide forward into deeper darkness. Tomorrow, perhaps you will adjust your position slightly. Perhaps you will experiment with placing your chest closer to the hull for added wind protection. Each night teaches you something new, and as you drift towards sleep, you sense that warmth will not come from wood alone. It will come from what you wrap around yourself and from the bodies that settle close beside you when the temperature falls further. The cold returns with a quiet persistence, not dramatic, not theatrical, just steady. It slips between your fingers and into the weave of your clothing, testing every seam. You become acutely aware that the true barrier between you and the North Atlantic night is not the ship, not the sea chest beneath you, but what you are wearing. From lanolin, the natural wax in sheep's, from lanolin, the natural wax in sheep's wool. It resists water more effectively than you might expect. Even when spray darkens the surface, the fibers still trap air within their structure, holding warmth close to your skin. It's widely recognised by textile historians that wool was the cornerstone of Viking-era clothing. Linen might serve in warmer months, but wool dominated outer garments. Tunics, trousers, hoods and cloaks were layered in combinations suited to the weather. This was not accidental fashion, it was climate strategy. You shift slightly and notice how your undertunic clings faintly with residual dampness from the day's exertion. Rowing generates heat. Heat leads to sweat. Sweat invites chill once the wind cools your skin, so you adjust your layers carefully. Perhaps you loosen the inner garment slightly to allow moisture to evaporate before sealing yourself again inside your cloak. There is a small, almost charming detail that sometimes surprises modern readers. Some Viking cloaks were fastened with ornate brooches, often beautifully crafted from bronze or silver. These were not merely decorative, they allowed quick adjustment. You can open your cloak during heavy labour and pin it closed again when the temperature drops. Function and artistry woven together. You glance around at your companions. Their silhouettes resemble small hills beneath thick wraps of fabric. Some have pulled hoods over their heads, shadowing their faces. Others tuck the edge of a cloak beneath their chin, creating a barrier against the wind that slips over the gunwale. The air smells sharper now. Night has fully claimed the sky. The ship moves through darker water and you feel the cold intensify with each passing hour. You rub your hands together and then slide them beneath your cloak, pressing them against your ribs to borrow heat from your own body. Researchers continue to examine how effective Viking clothing truly was in extreme maritime conditions. Some experimental reconstructions suggest that multiple layers of tightly woven wool can rival certain modern cold weather gear, at least in dry cold. The challenge, of course, is the dampness of sea life. It is one thing to stand in snow, it is another to sit in salt spray. You notice how the crew instinctively minimizes exposed skin. Sleeves are drawn down, neck openings are shielded, ankles are tucked beneath the hem of cloaks. Even small gaps become pathways for heat to escape. It is a quiet choreography of adjustment. You lie back against your sea chest again, cloak wrapped around you like a cocoon. Beneath it you may have another layer, perhaps a padded garment or a thicker woolen undertunic. The layering creates pockets of air. Those pockets warm with your breath and body heat. That trapped air becomes your invisible insulation. There is also the matter of head covering. Heat escapes quickly from the scalp. You pull a wool cap lower, feeling it press against your ears. The simple act reduces the sting of wind significantly. It is a modest change with noticeable effect. Academic discussions sometimes question how standardized Viking clothing was across different regions of Scandinavia. Climate varied from Denmark to northern Norway, and garments likely reflected local conditions. You imagine heavier cloaks for voyages northward, perhaps lighter ones for southern routes. Variation within a shared tradition. You exhale slowly and watch your breath plume faintly in the dark. The sky above is a scatter of stars, brilliant and cold. There is no canvas roof over you tonight, no sail rigged as shelter, just wool skin and shared proximity. Your neighbour shifts closer without comment. His cloak brushes yours. The friction of fabric against fabric creates a small barrier against the wind that threads through the line of shields. You feel the subtle increase in warmth and realise that clothing is only part of the equation. Bodies add to it. You flex your toes inside the leather shoes. The soles are thin compared to modern boots, but perhaps you have wrapped your feet in extra woolen strips beneath them. Foot wrappings, simple and effective, add insulation. They can be dried more easily than thick socks and adjusted as needed. The ship creaks softly. A rope taps lightly against the mast. These sounds merge with the steady hush of water against wood. Your breathing slows as you settle into your layered refuge. You reflect on how different this feels from the idea of Vikings as perpetually exposed warriors indifferent to discomfort. The reality is more nuanced. Survival depended on preparation, on understanding materials, on knowing how to use what you had with precision. You tuck your chin into your chest, drawing the edge of your cloak higher. The fabric smells faintly of smoke from a previous campfire, perhaps from a shore where you once slept more warmly. That scent is oddly comforting, a reminder that land and fire exist somewhere beyond this dark horizon. The cold is still present. It presses at the edges of your defences, but it no longer feels overwhelming. It feels negotiated. You have built a small portable climate around yourself with wool and careful adjustment. As the night deepens, you sense the warmth between you and your companions, gradually stabilising. The layered cloaks, the caps, the wrapped feet all contribute to a fragile equilibrium. You're not toasty, you're not luxuriating, but you're not freezing either. And as your eyes drift closed once more, you begin to understand that survival aboard a longship is less about brute endurance and more about quiet mastery of simple tools: fabric, position, breath. Soon you will discover that even clothing alone is not enough. When the temperature drops further, something else becomes essential. Not an object, but a pattern of human closeness that turns a narrow deck into a shared source of heat. The temperature slips lower in the deepest part of the night, when even the waves seem to move more slowly, as if conserving their own strength. You wake briefly not because of a sudden sound, but because the cold has thinned the layer of warmth around you. It is subtle, a quiet reminder that wool and wood can only do so much on their own. Without opening your eyes fully, you become aware of the bodies near you. A shoulder presses lightly against your upper arm. Someone's knee rests near your calf. The arrangement is not accidental. It is geometry guided by survival. It's firmly grounded in historical understanding that crews on long voyages often slept in close proximity, especially in colder conditions. Longships did not provide individual bunks. The deck space was shared, and in colder climates that closeness became an advantage. Human bodies radiate heat. When gathered together, that heat accumulates. You shift slightly, angling your back more firmly against the man behind you. He adjusts in return, a silent negotiation. No one speaks. Words would waste breath and break the fragile drowsiness settling over the deck. Instead, you settle into a compact formation, knees bent, cloaks overlapping. There is something almost mathematical about it. If each person produces a certain amount of warmth, then pressing those sources together reduces exposed surface area. The wind that threads between shields finds fewer gaps to exploit. Your shared cloaks create a thicker barrier than any single garment could manage. A small lesser-known observation from experimental voyages reveals that modern sailors aboard reconstructed Viking ships often report noticeable warmth when sleeping shoulder to shoulder, even in brisk conditions. The effect is immediate and practical. You do not need a scientific instrument to measure it, your skin tells you. You exhale slowly, and the breath you release warms the space beneath your cloak before slipping into the air. The man beside you breathes in his own rhythm. The two patterns merge and diverge like the tide. This is not romantic closeness. It is communal pragmatism. The ship rocks gently and the movement passes through your combined weight. If you were lying alone, each tilt might feel sharper, more precarious, but together your mass stabilizes the motion slightly. The group becomes its own ballast, a living counterweight within the hull. Scholars continue to examine how social dynamics influence sleeping arrangements at sea. Rank friendship and rowing position likely shaped who lay beside whom. You imagine that trusted companions might cluster together, while newer recruits found space where available. Even in sleep hierarchy and familiarity linger. You open your eyes briefly and look up. The stars remain sharp, scattered across a sky so clear it almost feels brittle. The cold light contrasts with the warmth gathering beneath layered cloaks. It is a quiet paradox. Above you, endless chill. Around you, shared heat. There is a curious human comfort in this arrangement. The presence of others reassures you. If a sudden wave breaks over the side, you will not face it alone. If the ship shifts unexpectedly, hands and shoulders will steady you instinctively. Your survival is interwoven with theirs. You tuck your hands between your thighs, trapping warmth. The man behind you adjusts his cloak so that part of it covers your shoulder as well as his own. It is an unspoken exchange. Tonight his fabric overlaps yours. Tomorrow perhaps yours will shield him more fully. You realize that this method of sleeping transforms vulnerability into strength. Alone on this deck, exposed to wind and dampness, you would lose heat more quickly. Together you create a microclimate. Not perfectly warm, but tolerable, manageable. There is also the matter of morale. Cold can erode more than physical comfort. It can chip away at resolve. But closeness, even silent closeness, reinforces a sense of shared purpose. You are not just individuals enduring a harsh night. You are a crew moving through it together. A detail sometimes overlooked in popular portrayals is that many Viking crews were composed of men from the same region, sometimes even the same community. Bonds formed long before the voyage began. That familiarity made proximity less awkward and more natural. You are not strangers forced into contact. You are companions bound by common goals. The wind rises briefly, tugging at the edge of your cloak. You press closer instinctively. The warmth increases, slightly subtle but real. The ship answers the wind with a low creak, wood flexing in response. You feel your muscles begin to relax again. The chill that woke you has softened. The shared heat has thickened the air beneath your layered garments. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of those around you. In this narrow strip of deck pressed between sea chest and shield, you discover that survival at sea is not solitary heroism. It is cooperation at its most elemental level. Body beside body, fabric overlapping fabric, heat pooling where it can. Your eyelids grow heavy once more. The cold remains outside your small circle of warmth, persistent but held at bay. The stars wheel slowly overhead, indifferent to your arrangement. The sea carries you forward, and as sleep reclaims you in this shared cocoon of wool and human presence, you begin to sense that even more protection can be fashioned from the very structure of the ship itself. The sail above currently bundled and still may yet play a role when the wind turns harsher. The wind shifts sometime after midnight, not violently, just enough to change its angle. You feel it first along the back of your neck, a cooler thread slipping beneath the edge of your cloak. The shared warmth still holds, but the gusts now arrive from a direction the shields do not fully block. A murmur passes quietly along the deck, not alarm, just awareness. The man on watch leans closer to the mast and studies the sail currently furled and tied. The fabric hangs heavy in the dark, thick wool, catching faint starlight. It is well documented in maritime research that Viking sails were typically woven from wool rather than linen. Woolen sailcloth was durable and could be treated with animal fats or resins to improve resistance to water. This made it strong and reliable for propulsion. But it also meant that when lowered, the sail represented a vast sheet of dense fabric capable of blocking wind. You watch as two crew members rise, carefully moving with the steady balance of men accustomed to unstable footing. They loosen part of the bundled sail not to raise it for travel, but to adjust its drape. The mast stands firm at the centre of the ship, and from it the heavy cloth can be partially unfurled and angled. There is a subtle art to this manoeuvre. The goal is not to catch wind, but to tame it. A lesser-known detail, sometimes noted in experimental voyages, is that crews aboard reconstructed longships have used lowered sails as makeshift windbreaks while at anchor or drifting slowly. By securing the sail at an angle, they create a barrier against prevailing gusts. It is not a full enclosure. It is a shield of fabric between human bodies and open sky. You feel the effect within minutes. The direct sting of wind softens. The air beneath the partial canopy grows slightly more stable. It is not warmer in any dramatic sense, but it is less aggressive. Scholars continue to discuss how frequently such adjustments were made during actual Viking voyages. Some argue that manipulating the sail at night could be cumbersome and risky in rough conditions. Others believe experienced crews would have used every available resource to improve comfort when possible. You imagine that the decision depended on weather urgency and the skill of those aboard. The sail now hangs like a slanted ceiling over part of the deck. Shadows deepen beneath it. The stars disappear from your view, replaced by the dark underside of woolen cloth. There is a faint smell of lanolin and sea salt rising from it, mingled with the scent of tar from the mast. You shift slightly to position yourself beneath this new barrier. Others do the same, careful not to disturb the balance of the ship. The arrangement changes, bodies clustering where the wind is least intrusive. The geometry of sleep evolves once more. You reach out and touch the edge of the sail. The fabric feels thick and slightly coarse beneath your fingers. It carries the memory of wind from earlier in the day. Now it rests, serving a different purpose. The ship continues its steady glide. With the sail partially deployed as a windbreak, the interior space feels almost sheltered. Not enclosed, not cozy in the way of a room, but defined. The difference is psychological as much as physical. A boundary has been drawn between you and the vastness above. You notice how sound shifts as well. The direct rush of wind over your ears diminishes. The creaking of the mast becomes more pronounced, echoing softly beneath the wool canopy. The sea still murmurs along the hull, but it feels more distant. A practical observation from maritime studies points out that woolen sails were heavy when wet, sometimes weighing hundreds of kilograms. Lowering and adjusting them required coordination and strength. The fact that the crew can manipulate it even at night speaks to their familiarity with the vessel. This is not improvisation born of panic, it is practiced adaptation. You settle more deeply into your sea chest and overlapping cloaks. The air beneath the sail warms slightly from the collective heat of the crew. It is a fragile warmth easily disrupted by a sudden gust or shifting course, but it is real. There is also comfort in the visual effect. The lowered sail creates a sense of enclosure. Even though the sides of the ship remain open, the canopy overhead narrows your field of vision. The sky no longer stretches infinitely above you. Instead, you see fabric shadow and the faint outline of the mast. You feel less exposed. The watchman remains alert near the stern, occasionally glancing upward to ensure the sail's angle remains secure. A rope is tightened here and not checked there. The adjustments are small but deliberate. You draw your cloak closer and allow your eyes to close again. The wind still hums, but its sharpest edge has been blunted. The shared heat of the crew gathers beneath the wool canopy, pooling gently in the limited space. It is remarkable how a structure designed to capture wind for speed can, with a simple shift, become protection against that same force. The sail is both engine and shelter, depending on need. As you drift towards sleep once more, you sense that every object aboard this longship carries multiple purposes. Sea chests become beds, shields become windbreaks, sails become roofs. And tomorrow, perhaps you will discover how even the oars and the round shields lining the gunwales can be arranged to shield you further from the relentless northern air. By the following evening, you no longer wait passively for the cold to dictate your comfort. You begin to look at every object around you as potential shelter. The Longship stripped of luxury is rich in possibility if you know how to rearrange it. The wind has strengthened again, not enough to threaten the vessel, but enough to send a steady stream of chill air across the deck. The lowered sail from the previous night helped, yet the gusts now come from a slightly different angle. The sea is restless, slapping the hull with rhythmic insistence. You sit upright on your sea chest and study the row of shields along the gunnels. Each round shield is secured along the side, its painted face outward, its wooden back toward you. During battle, these shields protect against blades and arrows. At sea, they serve another quiet function. It's broadly acknowledged by maritime historians that shields were often hung along the sides of Viking ships while underway. Beyond display and readiness, they provided a modest buffer against spray and wind. When aligned closely, they formed a partial wall of wood and leather. You watch as one of the crew members adjusts his shield, slightly tightening the strap that holds it in place. The curve of its surface catches the wind and redirects part of it upward. The effect is subtle but noticeable. The gust that would have struck your shoulder directly, now, glances off the shield's rim. There is something satisfying about this transformation. An object built for combat becomes an instrument of comfort. A small but intriguing note from reconstruction voyages reveals that when shields are positioned carefully and overlapped slightly, they can significantly reduce wind penetration along the deck's edge. The difference may be only a few degrees of temperature, but on a cold sea night, a few degrees matter. You rise and adjust your own shield, ensuring it sits snugly against its neighbours. This line becomes more continuous, fewer gaps for wind to slip through. The wooden backs face inward now like a curved barricade. The oars too offer opportunity. During calm stretches when rowing is unnecessary, some oars can be drawn inward and rested along the interior. Their long shafts laid at an angle create additional barriers. You notice how two crew members angle spare oars between the mast and the side of the ship, forming a lattice of sorts. Researchers continue to explore how flexible Viking crews were in rearranging onboard equipment for temporary needs. The evidence from sagas and practical experimentation suggests that adaptability was essential. Space was limited and every tool had to serve more than one purpose. You reposition yourself closer to the shield line, feeling the reduced wind against your cheek. The leather facing of the shield carries a faint scent animal hide, cured and weathered. It has absorbed salt and sun over time, and now it stands between you and the night air. The ship creaks as a larger swell rolls beneath it. You brace your hand against the rim of your sea chest and steady yourself. The oars angled nearby sway slightly but remain secure. Their wooden shafts catch stray droplets of spray which bead and slide down toward the deck. There is an almost architectural quality to the arrangement now. Shields form walls, oars create internal supports, the sail above acts as a slanted roof. It is not a house, but it is a constructed space shaped by intention. A point of discussion among scholars concerns how often crews risked adjusting gear during rougher conditions. Some argue that in truly harsh weather, all equipment would remain tightly secured in its primary configuration, leaving little room for creative rearrangement. Others propose that experienced sailors could make small, safe modifications even in challenging seas. You imagine that judgment and experience were decisive factors. You lower yourself once more into your compact sleeping position. The shield at your side blocks much of the direct wind. The oar angled above you adds a sense of enclosure, narrowing the open space above your head. It feels less like lying in the open and more like resting within a framework. The soundscape shifts again. Wind now hums against wood rather than rushing freely across your ears. The shields vibrate faintly with each gust, a soft tremor you can feel through the hull. The oars creak gently where they meet the mast. You press your shoulder lightly against the shield's inner surface. It is cool but not icy. The barrier makes a measurable difference. The air beneath the improvised structure grows slightly calmer, allowing your shared body heat to accumulate more effectively. There is a quiet pride in this ingenuity. You're not merely enduring the night, you are shaping it, using what is at hand, turning weapons and tools into shelter. The stars remain visible through gaps between sail and shield, sharp and distant. But your immediate world has narrowed. Wood, wool and leather form a protective ring around you. You draw your cloak closer and feel the warmth of those beside you, amplified by the barriers you have constructed. The cold still exists beyond the shield line, beyond the oars, beyond the sail. But here within this carefully arranged pocket, it is softened. As your breathing slows once more, you understand that survival on a longship is a continuous act of adaptation. Every night demands small changes. Every shift in wind invites a new configuration. And as you drift towards sleep, shield at your back and oar above your head, you sense that the rhythm of rest itself must adjust as well. For not everyone can sleep at once on a vessel that never truly stops moving forward. The night deepens, and although your small fortress of shields and sail holds steady against the wind, you cannot sink fully into oblivion. The longship is never entirely asleep. It breathes, shifts, listens, and so must you. At some point a hand rests gently on your shoulder. Not urgently, just a firm practiced squeeze. Your eyes open to the low murmur of your name. It is your turn. You ease yourself upwards, careful not to disturb the carefully arranged cluster of bodies around you. The warmth you leave behind is immediately filled by someone shifting closer. The exchange is smooth, almost ritualistic. It is well established in maritime history that Viking crews operated with rotating watches, especially on longer voyages or when navigating uncertain waters. Someone always remained alert to changes in wind, the approach of land, or the faint outline of another vessel. Sleep, therefore, came in segments rather than in one uninterrupted stretch. You pull your cloak tighter and step carefully toward the stern where the man you're relieving stands with steady posture. The air feels sharper away from the cluster of resting bodies. Without their shared heat, the cold asserts itself more directly. The sea is darker now, the horizon nearly indistinguishable from the sky. Only the faint glimmer of starlight reveals the line where water ends and air begins. The sail above still partially angled as a windbreak rustles softly. There is a small but fascinating observation from reconstructed voyages that modern sailors often find night watch both physically demanding and strangely calming. The monotony of scanning the horizon combined with the steady rhythm of waves can create a meditative state. You begin to understand that sensation now. You rest one hand lightly on the tiller or the steering oar, depending on your position. The wood is cold beneath your palm. Your eyes sweep slowly from one side of the horizon to the other. Nothing but darkness and the occasional white flicker of foam. Researchers continue to discuss how strictly organized Viking watch systems were. Some suggest a formal rotation with clearly defined intervals. Others propose a more flexible approach shaped by trust and necessity rather than rigid schedules. You suspect it depended on the voyage. On calm nights, perhaps fewer eyes were needed. In treacherous waters, vigilance would tighten. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, feeling stiffness from earlier rowing. Fatigue lingers behind your eyes, but the cold air keeps you alert. It bites just enough to prevent drowsiness. Behind Egyptians, the sleeping crew forms a low, uneven silhouette beneath the sail and shields. You can hear faint breathing, an occasional sigh, the rustle of wool as someone adjusts their cloak. Their rest depends partly on your wakefulness. There is a quiet honour in that. The stars above seem brighter now, unfiltered by cloud. You recall how experienced navigators could read the night sky using familiar constellations to guide direction. Although tonight your task is not active navigation, you still glance upward, confirming that the ship holds its course. A curious note sometimes mentioned in saga literature describes how some sailors spoke softly to the sea during long watches, almost as if acknowledging its presence. Whether this was superstition habit or simple companionship with the vast as remember dark, it suggests that night watch carried psychological weight as well as practical duty. You lean slightly against the side of the ship, careful to maintain balance. The shields along the gunwale glint faintly. The oars rest silent. The longship glides forward with measured confidence. Time stretches differently here. Without a clock, you measure your watch by subtle changes in the sky, by the slow shift of stars toward the horizon. Your breathing settles into a steady pattern. The cold that first felt sharp now becomes the background sensation, a constant companion rather than an adversary. Eventually a hand touches your arm. Another crew member has risen to relieve you. The exchange is brief, wordless. You nod once and step back toward your sea chest. Returning to your place among the sleepers feels almost luxurious. The pocket of warmth beneath the sail welcomes you. Someone shifts to make space. You lower yourself carefully, drawing your cloak around you. Edan. This pattern of segmented rest shapes your perception of the night. You do not sink into a single deep sleep. Instead, you drift in and out, punctuated by moments of alertness. Your body adapts, learning to extract recovery from shorter intervals. There is a practical advantage to this rhythm. If danger appears, half the crew is already accustomed to waking quickly. Sleep remains light enough to yield to sudden need. You settle back against your sea chest shield at your side, the faint hum of wind softened by woolen wood. The warmth builds again as bodies press close. In this cycle of watch and rest, you discover another layer of survival. It is not only about fabric and barriers, it is about timing, about sharing responsibility so that no one remains exposed to cold and vigilance for too long. Your eyelids grow heavy once more. The horizon remains unbroken. The ship continues its steady course through dark water. And as you drift back into sleep, you sense that true relief from the cold will come not only from clever arrangements on deck, but from the promise of land itself. A quiet shoreline where fire can be kindled, and the longship can finally rest against sand. By the time the horizon begins to pale again, you notice a change in the air. It carries a different scent now, less purely saline, tinged with something earthy. Even before you see it clearly, you sense land nearby. A dark shape rises gradually from the mist ahead. Not towering cliffs, just a low stretch of coastline, perhaps a sheltered bay. The longship adjusts its course slightly. The rhythm of the oars shifts slower now, more deliberate. Relief moves quietly through the crew. Not loud celebration, just a softening of shoulders. Land means options, land means fire, land means a night not entirely at the mercy of open water. It's well supported by archaeological and textual evidence that Viking crews frequently beached their ships whenever practical. The shallow draft of longships allowed them to glide directly onto sand or gravel shores without the need for docks. This capability was not only useful for swift raids, but also for routine rest and maintenance. You feel the hull scrape gently against the seabed as the ship noses forward. Hands move quickly to secure ropes. A few men jump into the shallows, boots splashing, and guide the vessel higher onto the beach. The sound of wood against sand replaces the constant hush of waves along the hull. Stepping onto solid ground feels strangely unsteady at first. After days of subtle rocking, the earth seems almost too still. You take a few cautious steps, adjusting to the absence of motion. The air here feels less biting. The land blocks some of the wind, and even a low-rise in terrain offers more shelter than the open sea ever could. You turn back to look at the longship resting at an angle on the shore, its prow rising proudly against the morning sky. There is a small but telling observation from reconstructed voyages that modern crews often report the deepest sleep occurring on nights when they camp ashore rather than aboard. Even if conditions are cool, the ability to build a fire and stretch out on ground insulated with natural materials makes a significant difference. You and the others begin gathering driftwood and brush. Soon a small fire crackles to life a short distance from the ship. The scent of smoke drifts down and upward, rich and comforting. Heat radiates outward in gentle waves, warming your hands stiff from night watch and damp air. A practical historical reality is that open flames were rarely if ever used aboard longships at sea, due to the obvious danger to wood and tar-shielded planks. On shore, however, fire became central. Dried clothing warmed bodies and restored morale. You spread your cloak near the fire, careful not to scorch the fabric. Steam rises faintly as residual moisture evaporates. The sensation of warmth penetrating layers of wool feels almost luxurious after the restrained comfort of shared body heat. Researchers continue to explore how often Viking crews chose to remain aboard ship overnight versus making camp ashore. Weather urgency and unfamiliar territory all played roles. In hostile lands, the risk of ambush might outweigh the comfort of fire. In friendly or uninhabited areas, beaching the ship offered clear advantages. You kneel near the flames and extend your hands, watching the skin flush slightly as blood returns to chilled fingers. The crackle of burning wood replaces the creak of mast and hull. Above you, the sky brightens, fully revealing the coastline in greater detail. The crew works methodically. Some tend to the ship, checking rivets and seams. Others prepare simple food. A few gather additional brush for the fire. The rhythm is calmer than at sea. Even the conversation, low and steady, carries a different tone. There is something grounding about sleeping on land, even if only for a night. You can lie on a bed of grass or sand layered with cloaks and hides. You can stretch your legs fully without calculating the balance of the vessel. You can feel the steady support of earth beneath you. A lesser-known detail from saga accounts suggests that some crews dragged their ships farther up the beach and set up temporary tents using the sail as a roof supported by oars. This created a more defined sleeping area shielded from wind and dew. Whether done routinely or only in certain circumstances, the possibility adds another layer to your understanding of adaptability. As evening approaches again, the fire is fed generously. You sit close, absorbing warmth deep into your bones. The contrast with nights at sea is striking. Their heat was shared carefully among bodies and fabric. Here it radiates openly from flame. You lie back eventually on a bed improvised from cloaks and perhaps a layer of gathered grasses. The ground is firmer than the deck but far less damp. The air, while still cool, feels manageable with firelight flickering nearby. The longship rests behind you, silent and dark against the shore. Tomorrow it will carry you onward again into open water, but tonight it is simply a vessel at rest. You close your eyes to the sound of fire popping softly, and distant waves brushing the sand. The cold has retreated to the edges of your awareness. Warmth seeps inward steadily. And as sleep comes more deeply than it ever could on a rocking deck, you understand that surviving freezing nights at sea was not solely about endurance aboard the ship. It was about knowing when to seek the mercy of land, when to trade motion for stillness, and when to let fire do what wool and wood alone could not. Morning arrives gently on the shoreline, light spilling across the sand and catching the curve of the Longship's hull. The fire has burned down to glowing embers, faint warmth still rising from the ash. You wake with a sensation you almost forgot existed at sea. Fullness of rest, not perfect but deeper, heavier. For a moment you lie still listening. No constant creak of planks beneath you, no subtle rocking, only the soft hush of waves meeting shore and the occasional crackle from the fire's remains. Your muscles feel less tense, your jaw unclenches. It is widely acknowledged in maritime scholarship that open flames were never safely maintained aboard Viking longships while at sea. The vessels were constructed of overlapping wooden planks sealed with tar and organic fibres. A stray spark could have been catastrophic. Fire belonged to land, not to open water. You push yourself upright and glance toward the ship. Its dark silhouette rests solidly against the beach, pulled high enough to avoid the tide. Without the motion of waves beneath it, the longship appears almost delicate lighter than it seemed while cutting through the sea. The crew stirs around you. Cloaks are shaken out. A few men stretch near the fading fire palms extended toward the last of its warmth. There is a faint scent of smoke woven into everything now. It clings to your hair, your clothing, your skin, strangely comforting. A lesser-known but intriguing detail from historical reconstructions suggests that crews often use shore time not only for rest but for careful drying of equipment. Wet wool cloaks, damp leather, and even rope could be laid near controlled fires to reduce accumulated moisture. Dry materials hold heat more effectively. Dampness steals it. You gather your cloak and inspect it. The outer surface still feels slightly stiff from dried salt. You hold it closer to the rekindled flames as someone feeds new wood into the fire. Warmth spreads slowly through the fibres, and you imagine how much easier the next night at sea will feel with truly dry layers. Scholars continue to discuss how frequently Viking crews were forced to remain offshore overnight due to urgency or hostile coastlines. In such cases, they would have endured the absence of fire for extended periods. But whenever landfall was possible and safe fire transformed the equation entirely. You kneel and rub your hands together above the flames. The heat penetrates more deeply than shared body warmth ever could. It reaches into joints stiff from rowing and watch duty. It relaxes muscles that had remained subtly braced against the motion of the ship. There is also psychological comfort in firelight. The flicker breaks the vast darkness into manageable shadows. It defines space. At sea, the night feels endless and undefined. On shore, the circle of light creates a boundary between you and the unknown beyond. You notice how the crew arranges themselves instinctively around the flames, forming a loose ring. Conversation flows more freely here than on the deck at night. Laughter rises briefly. Stories are murmured. The shared ordeal of cold sea nights feels lighter in the presence of warmth. A curious note from saga literature mentions how fires on shore sometimes served as signals either to allies or as warnings to enemies. The glow of flame against a dark coastline could communicate presence. Whether intentional or incidental, fire carried meaning beyond warmth. You stretch your legs fully for perhaps the first time in days. The sensation is almost luxurious. No need to keep knees tucked close to conserve heat. No need to calculate the balance of weight on a narrow deck. As the day progresses, some crew members gather additional wood in preparation for the coming evening. The awareness of cold never truly leaves you. Even on land, northern nights can bite sharply. But with fire at hand, the threat feels diminished. When darkness falls again, the flames burn brighter. You lie on a bed layered with cloaks and perhaps a few gathered branches beneath to insulate you from the damp ground. The warmth from the fire reaches your face, contrasting with the cooler air at your back. You watch sparks drift upward into the night sky. They glow briefly, then vanish into darkness. The longship rests quietly behind you. Its sail furled, its shield stacked or left in place along the sides. There is a sense of reset here. Your body absorbs heat deeply, restoring what was gradually drained during nights at sea. Even your breathing feels slower, steadier. You realize that surviving freezing nights on a longship was never about eliminating cold entirely. It was about cycles, enduring exposure, seeking relief when possible, drying, warming, restoring, then returning to the sea prepared once more. As sleep approaches, you feel a gentle gratitude for this pause, for wood that burns, for land that does not move beneath you, for warmth that radiates outward without negotiation. Tomorrow the ship will slide back into the water, the sail will rise, the wind will test you again. But tonight the memory of open sea cold fades beneath the steady glow of flame. And as your eyes close beside the crackling fire, you know that even without flames aboard the vessel itself, the lessons of warmth learned here will travel with you when you once again surrender to the dark waters beyond the shore. When the fire has burned low and the shoreline fades behind you once more, You carry its memory like an ember tucked safely inside your chest. The longship slides back into open water with that familiar whisper of hull against waves, and you return to your narrow territory between sea chest and shield. But something is different now. Your cloak is fully dry. Your leather shoes no longer feel faintly stiff with salt. Even the ropes smell less damp. That brief communion with fire has restored more than warmth. It has restored efficiency. As the day stretches on and the wind remains tolerable, you begin preparing for another night aboard. This time you reach deeper into your sea chest and withdraw something softer than folded wool, carefully rolled animal hide. It is well established in archaeological findings that animal skins played a significant role in Viking daily life. Cattle, sheep, and even reindeer hides were used for clothing blankets and bedding. These skins provided insulation far superior to bare wood, especially when laid fur side up. You shake the hide gently and drape it across the lid of your sea chest and partially onto the deck beside it. The fur catches faint light, dense and slightly coarse. When you press your palm into it, the fibers yield and then spring back, trapping air within their thickness. There is a subtle pleasure in this preparation. You are not merely bracing for cold, you are shaping your sleeping surface with intention. A lesser-known observation from burial sites such as the Oseberg ship suggests that high-status individuals were interred with elaborate textiles and possibly bedding materials, indicating that comfort even at sea or in symbolic voyages held cultural significance. While your circumstances are simpler, the principle remains. Soft layers matter. You lower yourself carefully onto the hide as evening deepens. The difference is immediate. The fur insulates you from the chill of the sea chest beneath. The small pockets of trapped air within the hide reduce heat transfer from your body into the wood. Around you others perform similar rituals. A sheepskin appears here. A thicker woolen blanket is unfolded there. The deck gradually transforms from bare timber into a patchwork of organic insulation. Researchers continue to examine how widely available such hides were among different crews. Wealth, region and purpose of voyage likely influenced the quality and quantity of bedding materials. A trading expedition might carry more comfort items than a swift raiding party. You imagine variation across voyages shaped by resources and priorities. You lie back fully now, cloak wrapped around you, hide beneath shield at your side. The ship rocks gently, but the fur softens each subtle jolt. It is not a mattress in the modern sense, yet it creates a buffer between your body and the vessel. The smell of the hide rises faintly earthy, an animal mingling with wool and salt. It is a grounding scent, a reminder that warmth often comes from living creatures repurposed for survival. You run your fingers through the fur, briefly appreciating its density. Each strand contributes to the insulation, capturing warmth close to your skin. You understand intuitively why such materials were valued. A detail sometimes overlooked in popular portrayals is that bedding in cold climates often involved layering multiple materials, a hide beneath wool above perhaps another garment folded beneath the head. The principle is cumulative insulation. No single layer solves the problem. Together they create resilience. The wind tonight is steady but not Falkland fierce. The sail has been adjusted again into its angled position, forming a partial canopy. Shields remain aligned along the sides. The structure feels familiar now, almost routine. You notice how your body relaxes more quickly onto the hide than it did onto bare wood. The muscles in your lower back soften, your shoulders settle, even your breathing deepens sooner. There is comfort not only in warmth but in predictability. The sequence of preparation has become ritual. Lay out hide, adjust cloak, align shield, settle close to others, rotate watch. Academic discussion sometimes explores whether Viking seafarers experienced chronic sleep deprivation during extended voyages. While nights were undoubtedly fragmented, the use of insulating materials and shared heat likely prevented the extreme exhaustion one might imagine. The human body adapts when given even modest protection. You tuck the edge of the hide slightly upward along your side, creating a shallow wall against stray drafts. The fur brushes your cheek briefly, surprisingly soft. The stars above are partially obscured by the angled sail. The horizon is a dim outline. The sea continues its endless rhythm. You feel the warmth of those beside you increasing gradually as more bodies settle into place. The hide beneath you holds heat effectively, now no longer siphoning it away into cold timber. Your eyelids grow heavy. The memory of the shoreline fire lingers, but it no longer feels distant. It feels like part of a larger cycle of preparation and endurance. As sleep approaches, you sense that managing cold at sea is a layered art. Wood elevated by chests, fur layered atop wood, wool wrapped around skin, shields and sail shaping wind, bodies sharing heat. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the sea continues to offer new challenges. Moisture, perhaps the most persistent adversary of all, will demand its own quiet strategies in the nights to come. Even with fur beneath you, and wool wrapped securely around your shoulders, there is one presence you can never fully escape at sea. Moisture. It lingers in the grain of the wood, clings to rope fibres, settles invisibly into fabric. You do not always see it, but you feel its influence in the way cold creeps closer when cloth turns damp. You wake before dawn to the faint sensation of clamminess along your sleeve, not soaked, not drenched, just subtly wet from the night air and drifting spray. The sail above, though angled carefully, cannot block every trace of mist. It's a widely recognised reality in maritime history that life aboard open vessels in northern waters meant constant exposure to damp conditions. Even in relatively calm weather, condensation forms as warm breath meets cold air. Salt spray travels farther than expected. The line between dry and wet is always shifting. You lift your arm and press your palm against the wool of your tunic. It feels heavier than it did the previous evening. That added weight signals absorbed moisture. And moisture, as you have learned, steals heat more efficiently than dry air ever could. A small but intriguing observation from experimental sailing projects reveals that crews often rotate garments when possible, allowing one layer to dry while another is worn. On a longship, options are limited, but even minimal rotation can help. Perhaps you remove your outer cloak briefly during a calmer stretch of day, hanging it where sunlight can reach it. Scholars continue to examine how Viking sailors managed prolonged dampness on voyages that stretched across the North Atlantic. Some propose that frequent landfalls were essential not only for navigation, but for drying and maintenance. Others suggest that seasoned crews developed a tolerance for constant low-level damp without catastrophic heat loss. The truth likely lies somewhere between adaptation and necessity. You shift slightly and adjust the hide beneath you. Even the fur has absorbed a faint trace of moisture. It remains insulating, but less perfectly than when fully dry. You make a mental note to spread it in sunlight at the next opportunity. The ship creaks softly as a wave brushes along its side. Tiny droplets arc inward and settle across the deck. They bead briefly on the oar shafts before sliding downward. You become more deliberate in how you position your cloak. Instead of letting it drape loosely over the deck, you keep it gathered tightly around your torso, minimizing contact with damp surfaces. Small adjustments repeated nightly begin to define your routine. There is also the matter of salt. As water evaporates, salt crystals remain embedded in fabric. They stiffen fibres and can irritate skin. You rub your sleeve lightly between your fingers, feeling faint roughness where salt has dried. It is a minor discomfort, yet persistent. A lesser-known detail from textile studies suggests that Viking wool was often tightly woven and sometimes fooled a process that shrinks and thickens fabric, making it more water-resistant. This would have provided an advantage in maritime conditions. You imagine the careful craftsmanship behind your cloak threads compressed to form a denser barrier against damp air. The air grows colder as the night deepens further. Dampness intensifies that sensation, drawing warmth from exposed skin. You tuck your hands deeper beneath your cloak and angle your body slightly away from the wind. The crew around you shifts in subtle response. Someone pulls a hood lower, another rolls slightly onto his side to reduce surface area exposed to open air. These movements are quiet, almost synchronized, born from shared experience. Researchers have noted that repeated exposure to cold and damp conditions can condition the body to maintain circulation more efficiently. Whether through acclimatization or sheer necessity, Viking sailors likely developed physiological resilience over time. You wonder how many voyages it took before such adaptation felt natural. The sail above flutters faintly, shedding a few droplets that fall harmlessly to the deck. You listen to the soft tapping of water against wood. It is not dramatic, not storm-like, just persistent. You adjust your hider once more, smoothing it to prevent pooling of moisture along its edge. The fur still holds warmth effectively, but you are learning to monitor it as carefully as you would a rope or sail line. There is a certain humility in this process. You cannot conquer moisture. You can only manage it. Dry when possible. Shield when necessary. Adhere consistently. The horizon remains invisible in the dark, but you sense that dawn will come soon. With it, perhaps a stretch of sunlight strong enough to chase dampness from fabric and hide alike. Your breathing slows again despite the clammy edge along your sleeve. The shared warmth of those beside you compensates for some of the heat lost to moisture. Bodies pressed together generate a buffer against the subtle chill. As you drift towards sleep once more, you recognize that cold at sea is rarely dramatic. It is incremental. A slow negotiation between warmth produced and warmth surrendered. Dampness helps tips that balance easily if ignored. And tomorrow, if the weather shifts or clouds gather, you may face a more formidable challenge. Not gentle spray or creeping condensation, but the raw force of wind and storm that tests every layer of preparation you have so carefully assembled. The storm does not announce itself with thunder at first. It arrives as a tightening of the wind, a subtle deepening of the sea's tone. You feel it in the way the hull begins to rise more sharply over each swell, then drop with heavier insistence. By late afternoon, the sky has thickened into a low grey ceiling. The horizon blurs. The air tastes different, charged and metallic. You sense that tonight will not resemble the measured calm of previous evenings. A firmly grounded historical reality is that Viking longships were remarkably seaworthy for their size. Their flexible clinker-built hulls allowed them to bend with waves rather than shatter against them. This design enabled voyages across the North Atlantic, even into waters near Iceland and Greenland. Yet seaworthy does not mean comfortable. As the wind strengthens, the sail is adjusted carefully. Eventually it may be lowered entirely to prevent strain. Oars are secured tightly. Shields are fastened more firmly along the gunwales. The ship transforms from a gliding vessel into a resilient shell braced against force. You grip the side as the first strong gust hits. The longship tilts, then rights itself. Spray lashes over the shield, striking your cloak and face. The dampness you managed so carefully before now arrives in heavier bursts. There is no thought of elaborate sleeping arrangements tonight. The immediate concern is stability. A small but revealing observation from experimental voyages describes how modern crews aboard reconstructed longships often find that during rough weather, sleep becomes secondary to endurance. Rest is taken in fragments between shifts of bracing and adjusting equipment. The body learns to relax briefly even amid motion. You lower yourself cautiously near your sea chest, but instead of lying fully down, you remain semi-upright, knees bent, one hand gripping wood. The hide beneath you shifts slightly with each tilt of the hull. You adjust it quickly to prevent sliding. Scholars continue to discuss how Viking crews managed extended storms on open water. Some argue that they sought shelter along coastlines whenever possible, avoiding deep-sea crossings during volatile seasons. Others suggest that necessity sometimes forced them into prolonged deposure. The archaeological record confirms their reach across vast distances, implying a tolerance for harsh weather. The wind roars now, louder than conversation. The sail, if still partially raised, snaps and strains before being secured more tightly. Ropes creak, the mast groans with each violent sway. You tuck your chin down and pull your cloak as close as possible. Water soaks into the outer layer, but the inner layers remain relatively dry for now. You're grateful for every thread of wool. The ship climbs a wave and then plunges into a trough. Your stomach lurches slightly. Around you, the crew braces with practiced instinct. No one panics. Movement is purposeful, focused. There is an odd intimacy to enduring a storm together. Words are minimal. Each person knows his task. When not actively adjusting sail or oars, you anchor yourself low against the deck, reducing the risk of being thrown sideways. Night falls amid the chaos. The sky disappears entirely behind thick cloud. Rain joins the spray, striking your face in cold sheets. You realize that sleep tonight will not resemble the gentle drift of earlier evenings. It will be a series of brief, hard-won moments when exhaustion overtakes vigilance. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in Ed saga narratives describes warriors boasting of sleeping through storms to prove toughness. Whether exaggerated or not, such stories hint at cultural admiration for endurance. In reality, you suspect even the most seasoned sailor remained partly alert in such conditions. You wedge your shoulder firmly against your sea chest and lower your head onto your folded arm. The hide beneath you provides some insulation, though it is damp now. You close your eyes briefly. The motion is relentless. The hull shudders with each impact of wave against plank. Water splashes across the deck, pooling momentarily before draining away. You feel cold seep into your outer layers, but your inner garments still hold warmth close. You drift for a few minutes, then jerk awake as the ship tilts sharply. Instinct forces your hand tighter against wood. Around you, others do the same. No one complains. There is no space for complaint. The storm rages through the night, sometimes easing slightly, then returning with renewed force. Sleep comes in thin slices. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, enough to keep your mind from fraying completely. Through it all, the longship proves its design. It flexes rather than splinters. It rises rather than capsizes. The very features that made it uncomfortable for rest now contribute to survival. By the time the storm begins to weaken toward dawn, you feel as though you have not slept at all. Yet you know you must have, if only in fragments. Your body remains upright, your grip steady. As grey light returns, revealing a calmer sea, you exhale slowly. The worst has passed. Cloaks drip, hides are soaked, Everyone is chilled, and yet you are alive. You begin already to think ahead. Drying, relayering, rearranging shields and sail for calmer winds. The cycle resumes. Storm nights test more than fabric and wood. They test endurance, patience, and the fragile balance between rest and vigilance. As the sea settles once more into a steady rhythm, you sense that not every night will be defined by chaos. Some will be shaped instead by the turning of seasons themselves, by endless daylight or stretching darkness that alters your very sense of time. When the storm has passed and the sea returns to a steady roll, you begin to notice something subtler than wind or spray. The quality of light itself is changing. If you are sailing in high summer, the night never fully arrives. The horizon glows long after sunset, a pale band of silver that refuses to fade. Even at what should be the darkest hour, a dim twilight lingers, blurring the boundary between day and night. It's well documented that in the northern latitudes where many Viking voyages began, summer nights can be extraordinarily short. The farther north you travel, the more the sun lingers. In some regions, it barely dips below the horizon at all during certain weeks. You lie back against your sea chest and stare upward, waiting for darkness that never quite deepens. The stars appear late and faint, if at all. The air remains cool, but not as biting as in earlier nights. This abundance of light reshapes your sense of sleep. Without full darkness, your body hesitates to surrender completely. You feel drowsy yet alert. The crew around you shifts restlessly, not because of cold, but because the night feels unfinished. A fascinating detail sometimes noted in studies of circadian rhythms suggests that prolonged daylight can disrupt natural sleep cycles. While Vikings did not speak in scientific terms about melatonin or internal clocks, they undoubtedly experienced the disorientation of bright northern summers. You pull your cloak over your eyes to block some of the lingering glow. The fabric filters the light into a muted amber haze. It helps, but only slightly. Scholars continue to examine how seasonal extremes influenced daily life in early medieval Scandinavia. Some argue that extended daylight allowed for longer periods of work and travel during summer voyages. Others suggest that sleep may have been broken into multiple shorter segments taken whenever opportunity arose, rather than confined to a single nighttime block. You notice that watch rotations feel different now. With more visible horizon, even late into the night, vigilance becomes easier in some ways. You can see approaching shapes more clearly, but true rest becomes harder to claim. The air smells faintly fresher in these lighter nights. Seabirds cry occasionally in the distance, their calls carried farther in the thin twilight. The ship glides forward, its shadow faint against the luminous water. Then, as weeks pass and your route shifts, the opposite extreme begins to assert itself. If you sail later in the year, or farther north toward autumn, darkness returns with dramatic intensity. The nights lengthen, the sun sinks earlier, and when it disappears it does so completely. Stars blaze brighter than you remember. The sky feels deeper, more expansive. You lie beneath the angled sail and feel the difference immediately. Darkness encourages stillness. Your body relaxes more readily when the world around you dims fully. A small but intriguing observation from saga descriptions hints that winter voyages were less common due to harsher seas and limited daylight. Yet shorter autumn days would have still demanded adaptation. Long hours of darkness meant extended exposure to cold unless landfall and fire were secured. You tuck your hands beneath your cloak and feel the chill intensify in these longer nights. Darkness brings deeper cold. The absence of sun during the day reduces the warmth stored in wood and fabric. The crew adjusts accordingly. Hides are layered more generously, cloaks overlap more tightly, shields are secured carefully against sharper winds. Researchers have pointed out that human perception of cold is influenced not only by temperature but by light levels. Darker conditions can heighten the sensation of exposure. You sense this psychological edge as you lie in near total blackness, hearing the sea but seeing little. The stars wheel slowly above you, marking time in a way more ancient than any clock. You trace familiar patterns, perhaps recalling constellations learned in childhood. In this darkness, navigation and rest intertwine. The same stars that guide your course also accompany your sleep. You realize that freezing nights at sea are shaped not only by wind and water, but by the tilt of the earth itself. The angle of sunlight determines how much warmth the day can lend to the coming night. In summer, you fight brightness to find rest. In autumn, you fight deep cold carried by extended darkness. Each season brings its own negotiation. As you settle into another long night beneath a sky scattered with stars, you draw your cloak closer and press more firmly against those beside you. The memory of endless summer twilight fades, replaced by this profound black canopy. Your breathing slows. The ship continues its patient glide, and you begin to sense that not all aboard experience these nights in the same way. Rank and responsibility may shape where one rests and how much shelter one receives. Even on a narrow deck, hierarchy leaves its quiet imprint. As the longship cuts steadily through dark water, you begin to notice subtle differences in where people position themselves when night falls. Space is limited, yes. The deck remains narrow. Sea chests still define personal territory, and yet not all places feel equal. Your own spot rests near your assigned oar, close enough to the shield line to benefit from its windbreak. The sail, when angled carefully, provides partial cover overhead. It is a workable arrangement, not luxurious but defensible against cold. Then your eyes drift toward the stern. There near the steering oar stands the man responsible for the vessel's course. The steersman, often a figure of authority or at least of high trust, occupies a slightly different zone of the ship. The raised position near the stern grants visibility and control. It also offers a subtle advantage at night. It's widely accepted by historians that longships operated under clear leadership structures, even if not rigidly formalized in every detail. A chieftain captain or experienced helmsman held command. Responsibility and status were intertwined. Where you stood during battle mattered. Where you slept could matter as well. You watch as the leader settles for the night. His sea chest is positioned near the stern, where the curvature of the hull sometimes provides marginally more shelter from Drhiac spray. The steering structure itself may block some wind. It is not a private cabin, but it is a slightly favoured corner. There is a small but telling detail in certain saga descriptions that high-status individuals sometimes travelled with thicker cloaks or additional bedding materials. Wealth translated into better textiles. Better textiles meant improved insulation. It was not a dramatic difference, but enough to be felt. You do not resent this. The burden of command is heavy. When storms rise, it is the leader who must remain awake longest, making decisions that affect every life aboard. A modest advantage in rest is practical, even necessary. Researchers continue to discuss how egalitarian Viking ship life truly was. Some argue that longship crews operated with strong communal bonds and relatively flat social structures compared to later medieval hierarchies. Others point out clear distinctions in wealth and authority reflected in burial goods and saga narratives. On deck you sense both elements at once: shared hardship, unequal privilege. The sail shifts slightly overhead as a breeze catches its edge. You pull your cloak tighter and glance again toward the stern. The leader has positioned himself with his back against a more solid section of hull partially shielded from crosswinds. A crew member nearby adjusts a rope to secure the sail's angle more firmly. You return to your own space and settle down. The hide beneath you remains dry for now. The shield at your side blocks most of the wind. You feel the warmth of those pressed close. There is also a practical hierarchy in watch duty. Those with greater navigational knowledge or responsibility may take specific hours. You may be woken at different intervals depending on your role. The rhythm of sleep shifts accordingly. A lesser-known insight from maritime anthropology suggests that leadership at sea often required strategic placement, not only during active sailing but during rest. Being near the steering mechanism allowed rapid response if conditions changed suddenly. Comfort and readiness merged. You lie back and consider how even minor variations in position alter your experience of cold. A few inches farther from the shield line would expose your shoulder more fully to wind. A slightly different angle of the sail could redirect gusts toward or away from you. The ship creaks gently as it rides a moderate swell. The sound is almost reassuring now, familiar as a heartbeat. Around you the crew settles into compact shapes once more. Some lean more heavily against their sea chests, others tuck closer beneath overlapping cloaks. The sail above creates a slanted ceiling of shadow. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again to watch the stars between folds of woolen fabric. The hierarchy aboard does not erase shared vulnerability. Storms do not discriminate between captain and rower. Cold air moves freely across all faces, yet small differences remain. Slightly thicker wool, slightly better positioning, slightly more control over when to rest and when to remain alert. Scholars continue to examine how power dynamics aboard Viking ships influence daily life beyond battle. While evidence remains fragmented, it is clear that leadership roles carried both privilege and burden. You see that balance here in the quiet arrangement of sleeping bodies. You draw your cloak around your shoulders and shift closer to your companions. Even without the modest advantage of the stern's shelter, shared heat compensates effectively. The sea stretches endlessly around you, indifferent to rank. The stars shine with equal brightness over every sleeping figure on deck. As you drift towards sleep, you understand that survival aboard this vessel depends less on individual advantage and more on collective endurance. Position matters, textile quality matters, but ultimately everyone relies on the same wood, the same sail, the same sea. And in time you will discover that not every voyage consists solely of warriors and seasoned sailors. Some journeys carry different passengers, entirely reshaping the way nights unfold upon the longship. The sea feels different when the purpose of a voyage shifts. Not every longship carries only hardened warriors or seasoned traders. There are moments in the historical record when families travelled too, when settlement not raiding was the goal, when women and children stood on decks much like this one, gazing toward unfamiliar horizons. You imagine such a journey now. The longship still glides across cold water, still narrow and exposed. But the atmosphere aboard is altered subtly. A softer voice here, a smaller pair of boots there. It's firmly supported by archaeological and textual evidence that Viking women did participate in voyages, especially during periods of settlement expansion to places like Iceland and Greenland. Grave goods and saga accounts both point toward female presence in exploration and colonization efforts. This was not a world exclusively male at sea. You shift on your sea chest and consider how sleeping arrangements would adapt in such circumstances. Privacy was scarce, space remained limited, yet the presence of families likely demanded additional care in how warmth and protection were managed. A small but fascinating detail from burial finds suggests that women often possessed high-quality textiles, sometimes more elaborate than those of men. Fine wool cloaks, decorated brooches, layered garments. In the cold of a longship deck, such materials would provide tangible advantage. You picture a mother settling near the mast, drawing her cloak around a child. The shared body heat becomes even more crucial. A smaller body loses warmth faster. The cluster of sleeping forms tightens instinctively around the most vulnerable. Researchers continue to examine how mixed crews balanced labour and protection during voyages. Did women row alongside men in some instances? Did children remain mostly sheltered amidships? The evidence is incomplete and interpretations vary. Yet settlement voyages clearly involved entire households. You feel how the rhythm of night might change with younger passengers aboard. Watches must still be kept. Sails must still be adjusted. But perhaps conversation softens in tone. Perhaps cloaks are spread more generously to create small protected pockets within the open deck. There is also the practical matter of supplies. A voyage intended for settlement likely carried additional goods, livestock, tools, household items. The presence of cargo alters sleeping space, further compressing bodies more tightly together. You draw your hide closer beneath you and imagine layering it partially beneath someone smaller, sharing insulation rather than claiming it fully for yourself. The ethic of survival shifts when the goal is not conquest but continuity. A curious note found in certain saga narratives describes women managing domestic tasks even during voyages, tending to food preparation or mending clothing while at sea. This suggests that daily life did not entirely pause simply because the ship was in motion. Nights would carry echoes of these routines, perhaps with whispered stories told to restless children under a lowered sail. The wind tonight is moderate, not fierce. The sail has been angled carefully as before. Shields remain aligned, forming their curved wall along the gunwale. You settle back and consider how sleep becomes an act of protection when families travel. Not merely recovery from labour, but the preservation of life. The positioning of bodies may form a protective ring around children. The thickest cloaks may be placed over the smallest forms. Scholarly discussion continues regarding the frequency of entire families on longships compared to broader cargo vessels known as nars, which were better suited for transporting goods and livestock. Some argue that longships were primarily war and exploration vessels, while nars carried settlers more often. Yet overlap likely existed, especially in early exploratory phases. You close your eyes briefly and listen to the breathing around you. In your imagined family voyage, that breathing includes softer rhythms, the occasional murmur of a child turning in sleep, the low reassurance of a parent's voice. The cold does not discriminate, it reaches for everyone equally, but collective warmth adapts accordingly. You tuck your cloak more securely and feel the steady pulse of the ship beneath you. The deck remains narrow, the sea remains vast, yet the purpose of the journey changes the emotional weight of the night. You realize that freezing nights at sea were not only endured by those seeking battle or trade, they were faced by those carrying hope for new land, new homes, new beginnings. The stars above shine with indifferent clarity. The sail above shifts gently. The shields hum faintly as wind brushes their curved surfaces. You draw a slow breath and imagine a child's small hand gripping the edge of a cloak for comfort. You imagine a mother adjusting her position to shield that child from draught. The ingenuity of wool, fur sail and shield remains essential, but so too does human tenderness. As sleep gathers once more around the deck, you sense that not every night is shaped by tension alone. Some carry anticipation, others carry fear of what lies ahead. And in voyages driven by ambition or survival, the mood of the crew can alter how rest settles upon the ship, especially on nights before uncertain landings. The mood shifts again when the purpose of your voyage sharpens into something more dangerous. You feel it in the way conversation grows sparse as unfamiliar coastline appears on the horizon. The longship moves more quietly now, sail adjusted with care, oars dipping with deliberate rhythm. You sense tension not only in waking hours but as night approaches. Tomorrow may bring confrontation. Tonight you must rest. It's well supported by historical sources that Viking raiding expeditions often relied on surprise. Longships allowed crews to approach swiftly and depart just as quickly. Coastal monasteries and settlements were targeted precisely because ships like this could appear and vanish with startling efficiency. As dusk deepens, the crew beaches the vessel in a sheltered inlet or anchors just offshore if conditions demand. Fires may be avoided to prevent revealing your presence. The absence of flame makes the cold feel sharper, more immediate. You lie back against your sea chest with the knowledge that morning may require sudden movement. Your body, already familiar with segmented sleep, remains partly alert. Even as you pull your cloak tight and settle onto your hide, your ears strain for unusual sounds. There is a certain heaviness in the air, not from storm or season, but from anticipation. A curious detail found in saga literature describes warriors reciting poetry or invoking ancestral strength before battle. Whether exaggerated or not, such accounts suggest that the night before action carried ritual significance. Sleep may have been thinner, punctuated by whispered words or silent reflection. You glance upward at the stars bright against a clear sky. The sail has been lowered fully to reduce visibility. Shields are stacked or laid flat. The deck feels more open without its partial canopy. Researchers continue to examine how much rest crews actually achieved before raids. Some argue that adrenaline and anxiety likely disrupted deep sleep. Others suggest that experienced warriors accustomed to such tension learned to conserve energy, even on the eve of conflict. You close your eyes and attempt to slow your breathing. The cold presses against your cloak, but your mind is more active than on previous nights. You imagine the shoreline ahead, the structures that may stand there unaware of your presence. The longship rests lightly in the water, its hull barely rocking. The stillness amplifies every small sound. A rope creaks. A faint splash echoes from somewhere in the darkness. You shift closer to your companions, drawing shared warmth not only for insulation but for reassurance. The presence of others steadies you. A small but intriguing observation from experimental reconstructions is that psychological stress can heighten sensitivity to cold. When the mind is tense, the body may perceive chill more acutely. You feel that now. The night air seems sharper even if the temperature is no lower than before. You adjust your cloak and tuck your chin down, seeking to calm your thoughts. The techniques you have learned remain vital. Hide beneath, wool around, bodies close, shield positioned if necessary. Scholarly discussion continues regarding the motivations behind Viking raids. Some emphasize economic necessity, others highlight social status, political power, or cultural norms. Whatever the reasons, the individuals aboard longships were still human, subject to the same physical vulnerabilities as any sailor facing a cold night. You listen to the breathing around you. Some men sleep deeply despite what awaits. Others turn restlessly. One murmurs faintly in a dream. The stars wheel slowly overhead. Time moves forward whether you're ready or not. Eventually fatigue outweighs anticipation. Your eyelids grow heavy. The cold becomes background once more, managed by layers and proximity. Sleep comes in shallow waves. You drift briefly into dreams, coloured by imagined shorelines and distant shouts. Then you wake again, heart quickened by nothing more than a shift in wind. The cycle repeats: rest, alertness, rest again. By the time the faintest grey of dawn touches the horizon, you feel as though you have not truly slept at all, yet your body holds enough strength. The warmth preserved through wool and shared heat has kept you from freezing. The careful arrangements of sail and shield have shielded you from the worst of the night air. You rise quietly with the others, drawing your cloak tighter as the first light reveals the coastline ahead. Freezing nights at sea do not pause for human plans. Whether you sail for trade settlement or conflict, the cold remains impartial. And as the longship glides forward once more, you sense that not all voyages are driven by violence. Some stretch far longer, carrying goods across vast distances, where endurance, not battle, shapes the rhythm of night and sleep. When the longship's purpose shifts from sudden strike to steady exchange, the atmosphere aboard changes in ways you can almost feel in your bones. The tension of imminent confrontation fades, replaced by something quieter. Endurance, patience, calculation. You imagine yourself now on a trading voyage rather than a raid. The ship may still be sleek and swift, but the cargo is different. Bundles of furs, carved goods, perhaps amber iron tools or finely woven cloth. The deck feels more crowded, not with warriors poised for action, but with carefully secured goods destined for distant markets. It's well established in historical research that Vikings were not only raiders, but prolific traders establishing routes that stretched from Scandinavia to the British Isles, the Frankish coast, the Baltic, and even deep into river systems leading toward Byzantium and the Islamic world. Longships and broader cargo vessels both played roles in this network. With trade comes longer journeys, weeks at sea, repeated nights aboard without the urgency of immediate landfall. Sleep becomes less about bracing for battle and more about sustaining strength over time. You settle against your sea chest as evening approaches. The cargo has altered your space slightly. Barrels and bundles restrict movement, narrowing the gaps between sleeping forms. You adjust your hide carefully to avoid pressing against rough surfaces. A curious detail from historical accounts suggests that some trading crews carried small luxuries to exchange along the way, including beads or finely crafted objects. You imagine the faint clink of such items secured within chests near you. Even at night, their presence hints at economic ambition rather than conquest. The sail above has been trimmed to catch a steady wind, and as darkness falls, it is lowered partially once more to serve as shelter. Shields remain along the sides, though perhaps fewer are displayed prominently when diplomacy, rather than intimidation, is the goal. Researchers continue to examine how long Viking trading voyages typically lasted without significant stops. Some argue that coastal hopping was common, allowing frequent rest and resupply. Others suggest that open sea crossings, especially to Iceland or beyond, required extended stretches without landfall. The duration would directly influence how sleep patterns developed. You lie back and feel the familiar chill of night air beginning to settle. Yet there is less tension in your body, no anticipation of sudden violence, just the quiet knowledge that tomorrow will bring more wind, more rowing, more steady progress toward a distant harbour. The rhythm of such voyages encourages routine. Watch rotations become predictable. The sequence of laying out hide, adjusting cloak, aligning shield becomes almost comforting in its repetition. A small but revealing observation from maritime anthropology notes that monotony at sea can be both soothing and mentally taxing. Days blur together. Nights repeat. The steady environment fosters resilience but can also invite introspection. You close your eyes and listen to the gentle creak of cargo shifting slightly with the movement of the hull. The smell of furs mingles with salt and tar. The air feels thick with purpose rather than threat. Scholars continue to discuss how economic incentives shaped Viking expansion as much as martial ambition did. The ability to transport goods efficiently across water routes transformed communities. The longship, though often romanticized for battle, was equally a vessel of commerce. You feel the cold more evenly tonight, not sharpened by anxiety. Your body relaxes into the layered insulation of wool and fur. The shared warmth of those around you builds gradually. A faint murmur of conversation lingers longer before sleep claims the crew. Stories of distant markets of silver coins exchanged of exotic goods glimpsed in foreign towns. Trade voyages carry curiosity alongside risk. You adjust your position slightly to avoid pressing against a barrel's curved edge. The narrow deck demands flexibility. Your sea chest anchors you as always, a small island of familiarity amid shifting cargo. The stars above shine clearly. The sail casts a slanted shadow over part of the deck. The ship glides forward with steady confidence. You consider how freezing nights on a trading voyage differ emotionally from those before battle. The cold remains constant, but the mind frames it differently. Endurance feels purposeful, tied to future gain rather than immediate danger. Your breathing slows. The repetitive nature of the journey lulls you. The sea's rhythm becomes almost hypnotic, and as you drift into sleep once more wrapped in wool and fur surrounded by goods destined for distant shores, you sense that physical survival at sea intertwines with sustenance in another form. Food, fatigue, the fuel that powers rowing arms and warms bodies from within. For warmth is not only layered around you, it is generated by what you eat, how you labour, and how deeply exhaustion allows you to surrender to rest. By the time several days of steady travel have passed, you begin to feel the voyage not only in your muscles, but in your appetite. Hunger arrives with reliable regularity, and the food you consume becomes more than sustenance. It becomes fuel against the cold. You sit on your sea chest during a calmer stretch of afternoon, chewing slowly on dried fish or salted meat. The taste is strong, briny, sometimes tough. It requires patience to soften with your teeth. Beside you, someone breaks coarse bread into smaller pieces, passing a portion along. It's firmly supported by archaeological findings that Viking sailors relied heavily on preserved foods during voyages. dried fish, salted meats, hard bread, perhaps some butter or cheese when available. These provisions travelled well and provided concentrated energy. Fresh produce was rare once away from shore. You swallow and feel the warmth begin to deep inside your chest. Food metabolizes into heat. Labour converts that energy into movement and circulation. The long hours at the oar, though exhausting, generate internal warmth that lingers into the evening. A lesser-known detail from isotopic analysis of Viking remains suggests that many coastal communities consumed significant amounts of marine protein. Their bodies were accustomed to diets rich in fish. That dietary adaptation may have supported endurance during maritime travel. As night falls, you notice how differently your body responds compared to earlier voyages when food was scarce. With adequate nourishment, the cold feels less invasive. Your muscles, though tired, hold warmth more effectively. Researchers continue to examine the relationship between diet and cold tolerance in pre-modern societies. While no one aboard speaks in scientific terms about calories or thermogenesis, the practical link is clear. A well-fed sailor sleeps warmer than a starving one. You settle onto your hide and draw your cloak around you. The day's rowing has left your arms pleasantly heavy. Fatigue spreads through your limbs, encouraging deeper rest. The wind tonight is moderate and the sail once again forms a slanted canopy. Shields remain aligned along the sides. The routine is almost soothing now. You feel the warmth generated by your own body radiating into the layers around you. The hide beneath traps it. The wool above holds it close. The shared presence of others amplifies it further. There is also the rhythm of labour itself. Repetitive rowing builds not only muscle but predictability. Your body knows what to expect. Wake, row, eat, adjust sail, rest. The cycle steadies your internal clock despite shifting light and weather. A curious observation from modern longship reenactments reveals that intense physical exertion during the day often leads to surprisingly deep sleep at night, even in less than ideal conditions. The body, thoroughly taxed, seizes any opportunity for recovery. You exhale slowly and feel your chest rise and fall beneath the layered wool. The cold air brushes your exposed cheek but does not penetrate deeply. Scholars continue to discuss how much caloric intake Viking sailors required during extended voyages. The combination of cold exposure and heavy labour would have demanded substantial energy. Preservation methods ensured food availability, but quantity may have varied depending on planning and luck. You shift slightly and feel the solid support of your sea chest beneath the hide. Your stomach is full enough to quiet its growl. The subtle ache in your shoulders reminds you of work completed. The sea moves steadily beneath the hull, its motion familiar now. You no longer brace instinctively against every small tilt, your body has learned the pattern. There is comfort in exhaustion. Not the frantic exhaustion of storm or battle, but the honest fatigue of labour done consistently. It makes surrendering to sleep easier. You tuck your hands beneath your thighs for added warmth and close your eyes. Around you, the breathing of others slows almost in unison. Freezing nights at sea are less brutal when the body carries internal fuel. Warmth does not depend solely on fur and wool. It rises from within, fed by salted fish and hard bread, by shared meals eaten on a rocking deck. As you drift toward deeper sleep, you understand that managing cold requires attention not only to barriers against wind and spray, but to the steady replenishment of strength. And beyond the physical, there are other forces shaping how night feels aboard this vessel. Beliefs carried from shore, dreams shaped by stories of gods and spirits, the unseen world that hovers at the edge of darkness. For when the sea grows quiet and the stars burn bright, the mind wanders into realms as vast as the ocean itself. When the sea lies almost unnaturally calm and the sky stretches clear from horizon to horizon, your thoughts begin to wander beyond wind and wool and the steady arithmetic of warmth. The dark above feels immense, scattered with stars so sharp they seem almost within reach. You lie back against your sea chest, hide beneath you. Cloak wrapped tight and listen to the quiet murmur of the hull cutting through gentle water. Nights like this invite reflection. They also invite imagination. It is firmly grounded in historical understanding that Norse belief shaped daily life in the Viking Age. The cosmos was not an empty void to them, but a layered universe filled with gods, giants, spirits, and unseen forces. Odin watched. Thor guarded. The world tree Yggdrasil bound realms together in a vast living structure. As you stare upward, you cannot help but think of those stories. The stars become more than distant lights. They become signs. Perhaps one cluster reminds you of a tale heard in childhood. Perhaps the Milky Way appears as a pale river across the sky, echoing myths of divine pathways. A small but intriguing detail preserved in saga literature suggests that dreams were often interpreted as messages or omens. A vivid dream before battle might be recounted and analysed carefully. Even aboard a longship in the open cold, the inner world carried significance. You close your eyes and allow your mind to drift. The rhythm of the sea merges with half-remembered stories of gods riding across the sky. The line between wakefulness and sleep blurs gently. Researchers continue to explore how strongly sailors at sea relied on spiritual frameworks to cope with uncertainty. Some argue that belief provided psychological resilience in the face of danger and cold. Others suggest that practical seafaring knowledge mattered far more than ritual. Most likely both elements intertwined. The wind tonight is mild. The sail forms its familiar angled shelter. Shields remain aligned. The practical barriers against cold are in place. Yet there is another kind of protection unfolding within your mind. You think of Thor's hammer as a symbol of defender, worn perhaps as a pendant around someone's neck aboard this very deck. Such amulets have been found in archaeological sites across Scandinavia, small metal charms shaped like Mjolnir. Their presence hints at a desire for divine safeguarding. You shift slightly and feel the warmth of those around you, steady and reassuring. The physical closeness grounds you even as your thoughts drift toward the mythic. Scholars continue to debate how literally Viking Age individuals interpreted their myths. Were these stories seen as concrete realities shaping daily events or as symbolic narratives embedded in culture? The evidence allows room for interpretation. What remains certain is that belief permeated life. You exhale slowly and let your breathing settle into the rhythm of the sea. The stars above remain bright. Somewhere in the darkness, a crew member murmurs in his sleep, perhaps caught in a dream. Dreams at sea carry their own texture. The constant motion of the ship seeps into your subconscious. You may dream of waves even when waters are calm. You may dream of land when surrounded by endless ocean. There is also fear that sometimes accompanies night, the unknown beneath the hull, the possibility of unseen creatures in deep water. Tales of sea serpents have circulated for generations, whether believed literally or used as cautionary imagery. A curious detail from medieval Scandinavian sources describes monstrous sea being said to dwell far from shore. Whether exaggeration or metaphor, such stories remind you that the ocean has always inspired awe and anxiety. You open your eyes briefly and look out across the dark water. The thing moves beyond the gentle rise and fall of waves. The ship glides forward with quiet confidence. Your cloak remains wrapped securely around you. The hide beneath traps warmth effectively. The shared heat of the crew creates a small island of comfort in the vastness. Belief does not eliminate cold, it does not block wind or dry damp wool, but it frames experience. It provides meaning to hardship and context to endurance. You close your eyes again and allow sleep to approach fully this time. The steady rocking of the hull feels almost like a cradle. The stories of gods and spirits soften into distant echoes. Freezing nights at sea are not faced with muscle and fabric alone. They are faced with imagination, with shared narratives that bind a crew together as tightly as overlapping cloaks. As your breathing deepens and the stars continue their silent arc overhead, you sense that not every threat to warmth is external. Sometimes it arises from within the group itself, in the form of illness that spreads quietly through close quarters. And when that happens, the careful balance of sleep and survival shifts once more. The first sign is small enough to ignore. A cough in the dark, not dramatic, not alarming, just a rough sound that lingers a second longer than it should. You shift slightly on your sea chest and listen as the wind threads softly through the shields. Another cough follows, closer this time. Life aboard a longship places bodies in constant proximity. Shoulders press against shoulders, cloaks overlap, breath mingles beneath the angled sail. Warmth depends on closeness, and closeness carries risk. It's well documented that infectious illness gets spread easily in pre-modern societies, especially in confined or crowded conditions. Viking crews packed together on open decks or clustered beneath partial shelters would have been vulnerable to coughs, fevers, and stomach ailments. There were no antibiotics, no sealed cabins to isolate the sick. You open your eyes and turn your head slightly. In the dim starlight, you see the outline of a man sitting upright, hand covering his mouth. His shoulders rise and fall unevenly. The cold air does not help. Each breath he draws feels sharp, and the effort of coughing steals warmth from his body. You feel a flicker of concern. Illness at sea is not merely discomfort, it threatens the balance of labour and rest. A lesser-known observation from skeletal remains suggests that many individuals in Viking Age communities endured chronic infections and physical strain. Bones reveal healed injuries and signs of stress. Hardship was familiar, recovery was not always guaranteed. The crew adjusts instinctively, space shifts slightly. Someone offers an extra layer of wool, another moves closer to share warmth while avoiding direct breath if possible. The balance is delicate. You need proximity for heat, yet you sense the danger of contagion. Researchers continue to examine how early medieval communities interpreted illness. Some viewed it through spiritual frameworks as punishment or omen. Others likely understood patterns of contagion intuitively, even without germ theory. Practical measures, such as increasing airflow or separating the visibly sick when possible, may have been used. On an open deck, airflow is constant. Wind moves freely across the hull. This offers some advantage over enclosed cabins of later ships, yet the very exposure that disperses breath also chills the weakened body more quickly. You pull your cloak tighter around yourself and watch as the coughing man lies back down, shivering slightly. Someone drapes a hide partially over him. Shared warmth becomes medicine of a kind. The sail above rustles faintly. The shields hum with passing breeze. The sea remains steady. You feel the fragility of the arrangement more keenly tonight. If too many fall ill rowing, strength diminishes, watch rotation strain, sleep becomes thinner. A curious detail from saga literature recounts episodes of sickness striking crews during long voyages, sometimes attributed to foul weather or divine displeasure. Whether mythologized or factual, such stories reflect an awareness that the sea was not the only threat. You adjust your position slightly to maintain warmth while allowing a bit more space between faces. The choreography of sleep shifts again, subtle and careful. Scholarly discussion continues regarding how Viking age medicine functioned in practice. Herbal remedies, charms, and simple wound care were common. At sea, resources were limited. Warmth, rest, and time were often the only available treatments. You close your eyes and focus on your breathing. Slow, even. The shared heat around you remains steady, though tinged with worry. The coughing subsides for now. The man's breathing evens out slightly. Perhaps it is only a passing irritation from salt air and cold wind. Freezing nights amplify vulnerability. When healthy, you can negotiate with cold through wool and proximity. When weakened, even mild chill penetrates more deeply. You shift closer again, ensuring that the hide beneath you remains dry and properly arranged. The shield at your side blocks most of the wind. The sail continues to angle overhead. In this fragile ecosystem of wood, wool, and flesh, balance must be maintained. Warmth shared wisely. Watch duties adjusted if necessary. Food distributed fairly to sustain strength. The sea glides onward, indifferent to human coughs or fevers. As sleep begins to gather once more around the deck, you sense that vigilance extends beyond a horizon scanning. It includes listening for uneven breathing, noticing small changes in posture, responding to quiet signs of weakness. And beyond illness, there remains another interruption to rest that cannot be ignored. The very stars you gaze upon for comfort also guide your course, and sometimes they demand attention in the middle of the night, for navigation does not always wait for daylight. The cough fades into the background of the sea's murmur, and for a while the deck settles into its familiar rhythm of layered breathing and creaking wood. You drift near sleep again, wrapped in wool, and hide shield at your back sail overhead like a slanted ceiling of shadow. Then a voice, low but firm, cuts through the quiet. Not alarmed, just attentive. You open your eyes to see the watchman tilting his head upward, studying the sky. The clouds that lingered earlier have thinned and the stars burn with renewed clarity. The horizon line is faint but visible. It is widely recognized that Viking navigators relied heavily on celestial cues during night travel. The North Star, though not perfectly aligned with true north in the early medieval period, as it is today, still offered a stable point of reference. Constellations, the position of the moon, and even subtle colour changes along the horizon provided guidance. You push yourself upright and draw your cloak closer as you join him. The air feels sharper away from the cluster of sleeping bodies. The warmth you leave behind is immediately noticeable. He gestures upward with a gloved hand. You follow his gaze. A familiar pattern of stars sits slightly lower than expected. The ship may have drifted subtly during the night. Researchers continue to explore the full range of Viking navigational methods. Some propose the use of sunstones, crystals that could help locate the sun's position even through thin cloud cover. Others emphasize experiential knowledge passed down through generations. Night navigation would have required both memory and keen observation. You steady yourself near the steering oar. The wood is cool beneath your palm. The sea remains relatively calm, but small changes in wind direction can alter course gradually over hours. A curious detail from later medieval sources mentions the term lidarstein, sometimes interpreted as a guiding stone. Whether this refers to a magnetic lodestone used in early navigation or to metaphorical guidance remains debated. The possibility lingers in scholarly discussion. For now, no stone is needed. The stars are clear. You adjust the steering, slightly feeling the subtle resistance of water against the rudder. The ship responds slowly, obediently. The sail above shifts with a soft rustle as its angle changes. Behind you, most of the crew remains asleep. Their rest depends on this quiet correction. You are keenly aware that navigation interrupts warmth. Each moment spent upright in the wind draws heat from your body. You shift your weight and tuck your free hand beneath your cloak to conserve warmth. The chill creeps along your cheek and neck. You miss the compact pocket of shared heat you left moments ago. Scholars continue to discuss how frequently longships traveled through the night versus anchoring to await daylight. Coastal navigation likely allowed for pauses, but open crossings demanded continuous movement. The decision would have balanced risk and urgency. The stars drift slowly as hours pass. You monitor their position, adjusting course incrementally. The horizon begins to lighten faintly at its edge, signaling approaching dawn. There is something almost meditative about this vigilance. The sky above and the sea below create a quiet dialogue, and you stand at the point where they meet. Eventually the watch shifts again. Another crew member rises, cloak wrapped tightly, eyes still heavy with sleep. You exchange a few quiet words, then step back toward your sea chest. Re-entering the cluster of sleeping bodies feels like stepping into a warmer world. The difference in temperature is immediate. You lower yourself carefully, nestling back into your hide and overlapping cloaks. Your body trembles briefly as it readjusts from cold exposure to shared heat. You press closer to your companions and feel warmth rebuild around you. Navigation has its cost in comfort, but it ensures survival. As your breathing slows once more, the first pale streaks of dawn stretch across the sky. The stars fade, gradually retreating into daylight. You close your eyes and allow sleep to claim what remains of the night. Even brief rest will restore some warmth before the next day's labour begins. Freezing nights at sea demand more than insulation. They require attention to sky and direction even when exhaustion pulls at your eyelids. And beyond the sleek hull you ride now, there exist other vessels in the Viking world. Broader and deeper, designed less for speed and more for cargo. Their decks and sleeping arrangements would feel different beneath the same cold stars. Soon you will consider how those ships manage the night in their own way. When you think of Viking ships, your mind naturally returns to the long, narrow silhouettes slicing across dark water. The sleek hull, the row of shields, the angled sail catching wind like a wing. But not every vessel of the Viking world shared that exact shape. You imagine now stepping from your familiar longship onto a broader craft. A nar. The difference is immediate. It's well established in maritime archaeology that nars were wider, deeper cargo ships used primarily for trade and settlement voyages. Unlike the longship built for speed and shallow river travel, the nar prioritized storage capacity and stability in open seas. You stand on its deck and feel the subtle shift in proportion. The beam is wider. The hull sits deeper in the water. Cargo fills much of the interior space, stacked carefully to balance weight. At night, this difference changes everything. On a longship, you sleep almost entirely exposed. On a nar, the deeper hull may offers slightly more shelter from direct wind at deck level. The sides rise higher, forming a modest barrier. It is not a cabin in the modern sense, but it reduces the relentless sweep of air across sleeping bodies. A small but intriguing detail from excavation reports suggests that knars often carried livestock on the settlement voyages. Sheep or goats would have occupied space aboard. Their presence not only affected cargo arrangement, but also introduced additional warmth and scent into the night air. You imagine lying down near the interior curve of a nar's hull. The higher sides block more spray. The deck feels less precarious under shifting weight. Researchers continue to examine how sleeping arrangements differed between vessel types. Some proposed that the broader deck allowed for slightly more flexible positioning of sea chests and bedding materials. Others cautioned that heavy cargo would have limited free space compressing sleeping areas, despite increased width. You lower yourself onto a hide and notice how the curvature of the hull cradles you differently. The higher gunnels shield your shoulder from wind that would have struck directly on a longship. The sail, still woven of thick wool, can be lowered and angled here as well, but the geometry changes. The canopy may feel more enclosed due to the ship's depth. The sea continues its steady motion, but the nar's heavier build dampens some of the sharper jolts. You feel less exposed to sudden tilts. The broader hull rides waves with slower, deeper movements. There is a trade-off, of course. The nar sacrifices speed. It cannot dart up narrow rivers as easily, but for long open crossings laden with goods or families, its design offers resilience and a touch more shelter. Scholars continue to discuss how often crews transferred between vessel types depending on mission. Some individuals may have known both experiences intimately. The feel of sleeping aboard a swift raider versus a cargo carrier would imprint differently in memory. You close your eyes and compare sensations. On the Longship, you are acutely aware of every gust and tilt. On the Nar, the wind still presses against wool and hide, but it feels moderated by structure. The smell of cargo fills the air, furs, wood, perhaps faint animal musk from livestock. It mingles with salt and tar, creating a denser atmosphere. You tuck your cloak tighter and feel the warmth gather more easily within the deeper hull. The shield line may be less prominent here, replaced by solid planking rising higher around you. A curious note from historical reenactments reveals that modern crews often describe Nars as feeling safer in heavy seas due to their cargo weight and hull shape. That sense of security can translate into deeper sleep when conditions allow. You press your back against the inner curve of the hull and listen to the muted thud of waves striking wood. The sound is less sharp than on a Longship, more of a low thrum than a slap. Freezing nights remain freezing nights regardless of vessel, but design influences perception. Shelter modifies sensation. Even a few extra inches of hull height can change how wind touches your skin. As you drift towards sleep aboard this imagined Nar, you appreciate how Viking ingenuity extended beyond a single ship type. They crafted vessels suited to different goals, each shaping how human bodies endured cold and darkness. The stars shine above both ships alike. The sea tests both equally, but the experience of rest varies subtly with structure. And in centuries to come, when these ships rest beneath layers of earth or seafloor, fragments of their construction will reveal clues about the lives once lived upon them. Archaeology will speak quietly of rivet and planks of design choices that shape not only voyages, but the texture of freezing nights under northern skies. Centuries pass in a breath. The Longship you once imagined gliding across cold water now rests beneath layers of earth and sand, its timbers darkened by time. The voices that once murmured under angled sails are silent, yet the shape of the hull remains pressed into the soil like a memory waiting to be uncovered. You step forward not onto a rocking deck this time, but into a quiet excavation trench. The air smells of damp earth rather than salt spray. Tools scrape gently against soil. A curved line of overlapping planks emerges, preserved in outer line, if not always in full strength. It's firmly supported by archaeological evidence that Viking ships have been discovered in burial mounds and beneath coastal sediments, most famously at sites like Oseberg and Gokstad. These finds have transformed understanding of ship construction and daily life. Rivets, planks, fragments of textiles, even remnants of bedding have offered glimpses into how voyages once unfolded. You kneel beside the exposed hull and trace the familiar clinker pattern of overlapping boards. Each rivet once held back the sea, each plank once creaked beneath sleeping bodies. A small but captivating detail from the Oseberg burial includes remnants of woven textiles and feather-filled bedding discovered within the shipgrave. While this vessel likely belonged to elite individuals and may not represent ordinary seafaring conditions, it hints that comfort and insulation were valued where possible. Researchers continue to examine what these archaeological traces reveal about life at sea. Some argue that burial ships represent symbolic vessels, not everyday working craft. Others contend that construction techniques seen in graves closely mirror those of active ships. The debate shapes how we interpret evidence of sleeping arrangements and onboard life. You move along the excavation site, observing impressions left by sea chests, the spacing of thwarts, where oars once rested, the position of mast steps. These structural details allow historians to reconstruct where bodies might have lain at night. The soil holds faint outlines of organic material long decayed, a dark stain where wood once lay, a cluster of iron rivets marking the curve of a hull long vanished. It feels as almost sacred, this quiet conversation between present and past. A curious observation from underwater archaeology reveals that some shipwrecks preserve objects in remarkable detail due to anaerobic conditions beneath silt. Fragments of rope tools and occasionally textile impressions have survived long enough to inform modern reconstructions. You imagine the cold nights once endured upon these very planks, the wool cloaks layered carefully, the hides arranged across sea chests, the sail angled to block wind. Scholars continue to discuss how representative burial finds are of everyday maritime life. Elite graves may exaggerate luxury, working vessels likely carried simpler equipment, yet structural similarities remain undeniable. You step back from the trench and picture the ship restored to its full height. Mast raised, sail unfurled, shields lining the gunwales. It feels less like an artifact and more like a living form. Archaeology does not preserve breath or warmth. It preserves form, but from form inference flows. The height of gunwales suggests degree of shelter. The width of deck indicates possible sleeping arrangements. The presence of storage compartments implies where insulation materials might have been kept. There is humility in relying on fragments. We reconstruct freezing nights at sea from rivets and soil stains from saga lines written centuries later from experimental voyages that test hypotheses. You walk along the length of the excavated hull and imagine lying down between those planks as wind sweeps across an open fjord. The physical reality of wood thickness, hull depth and beam width becomes tangible beneath your fingertips. A lesser-known detail from certain excavation reports describes traces of tar and wool fibers embedded in ship timbers, evidence of sealing and maintenance practices. These fibers once contributed to the barrier between sailor and sea. The earth around you is still and silent. No wind presses against shields here, no stars wheel overhead, yet through these remains you glimpse the practical ingenuity that allowed Vikings to endure cold nights on open decks. You close your eyes briefly and let the image of excavation fade, replaced by the rocking sensation of a living ship once more. For beyond archaeological trenches and preserved rivets, there are modern sailors who have stepped aboard reconstructed longships, testing in their own bodies what wood and wool can truly accomplish against freezing wind, and their experiences add another layer to the story. The excavation site fades from view, replaced by the sharp scent of fresh-cut timber and tar. You are no longer kneeling in a trench. You are standing beside a newly built hull, its planks gleaming with oil, its rivets bright and firm. Modern hands have shaped this vessel using ancient techniques. The overlapping boards are fastened in the same clinker fashion. The mast rises tall. The woolen sail hangs heavy and pale against the sky. You step aboard not as a Viking of the 9th century, but as a participant in an experimental voyage. The sea is the same, the wind is the same, only the centuries have shifted. It's widely acknowledged in contemporary maritime research that reconstructed Viking ships have been sailed across open water to test theories about speed stability and daily life aboard. These voyages provide invaluable insight into how cold motion and exposure were managed. You lower yourself onto a sea chest replica and feel the hardwood beneath you. There are no hidden cushions, no discreet modern insulation. The crew has committed to authenticity as much as safety allows. A fascinating and somewhat surprising observation from several reenactment crews is that sleeping on deck, though uncomfortable at first, becomes more tolerable over time. The body adapts. Muscles learn the rhythm of motion. The mind accepts the limits of space. You pull a thick wool cloak around your shoulders and lie back as night settles over the reconstructed ship. The wind brushes your face, carrying salt and coolness. The sail has been angled carefully as before, creating a partial canopy. Researchers continue to explore how accurately modern materials replicate Viking-era textiles. Even when woven traditionally, modern wool may differ slightly in processing, yet the insulating principle remains clear. Layering works. You feel the shared warmth of fellow reenactors pressing close just as you imagined centuries earlier. The shield line blocks some of the wind. The hull creaks in a familiar rhythm. One crew member murmurs quietly that the hardest part of sleeping at sea is not the cold but the constant awareness of instability. The body resists surrendering fully to sleep when the ground never stops moving. There is also a curious detail reported by several modern sailors. After the first few nights of restless adjustment, deeper sleep begins to arrive more readily. The human nervous system recalibrates. The rocking becomes background. You tuck your hands beneath your thighs and feel heat build gradually within your layered clothing. The hide beneath you traps warmth effectively, just as historical reasoning predicted. Scholarly discussion continues regarding how closely experimental voyages can approximate historical reality. Safety regulations, weather forecasting, and modern nutrition all influence experience, yet the core physical conditions of cold wind and open deck remain unchanged. You wake briefly in the middle of the night, the sound of a rope tapping softly against the mast. The stars blaze overhead. For a moment it is easy to forget the century in which you stand. The cold presses against your cheek, but your body has learned to conserve warmth. Cloak edges are tucked carefully. The sail blocks the worst of the gusts. Another reenactor shifts closer, murmuring half asleep about the surprising warmth generated by shared bodies. The observation mirrors what history implied. Human proximity remains one of the most effective defenses against freezing air. You close your eyes again and allow sleep to take you in fragments. Short intervals, then waking to adjust position, then sleep again. By dawn your muscles feel stiff, but you are intact, not frozen, not broken, simply aware of the demands placed upon you. The experiment confirms what archaeological evidence and textual hints suggested. Sleeping aboard a longship in cold conditions was difficult but survivable with proper layering, shared heat, and thoughtful use of sail and shields. You rise and stretch, watching light spill across the reconstructed hull. The past feels closer now, less mythic, and as you step back into the imagined world of Viking voyages, you recognize that modern cinema has often exaggerated their endurance into something almost superhuman. The truth, as always, is quieter, less dramatic, more practical. It lies somewhere between myth and measurable experience, waiting to be untangled from romantic legend. When you picture Vikings in popular imagination, you might see towering figures standing effortlessly against icy wind cloaks, snapping heroically faces unmoved by cold. Cinema loves that image, so do glossy illustrations, the idea of warriors who feel nothing, who sleep on bare wood without a shiver. But as you lie once more on the narrow deck of your longship, hide beneath you and wool wrapped tight, you know the truth is less theatrical. It is broadly supported by historical scholarship that Viking-age Scandinavians were hardy because of adaptation, not because of some mythical immunity to discomfort. They dressed for climate, they built ships suited to their environment, they developed routines that balanced exposure and relief. Endurance was cultivated, not magical. You pull your cloak higher around your chin and feel the wind brush your cheek. It's cold. It always has been. A small but telling observation from saga literature reveals that even legendary heroes complained about weather. Storms are described as harsh, frost as biting. These accounts do not portray men as indifferent to the elements. They portray them as determined despite discomfort. Researchers continue to examine how later romantic nationalism reshaped the Viking image into something exaggerated. 19th century art and literature often emphasized brute strength and stoicism, minimizing the practical realities of daily survival. The longship became a symbol more than a workplace. You glance around at the sleeping crew. No one appears heroic right now. They are bundled shapes of wool and fur shoulders, hunched against wind faces, half hidden beneath hoods. There is also a persistent myth that Vikings wore heavy furs constantly and strode through snow bare-chested without consequence. Archaeological textile finds tell a more nuanced story. Wool was common. Fur was used, yes, but not as universal costume. Layering was strategic rather than theatrical. You adjust your hide slightly and settle deeper into its insulation. The sail above forms a familiar angled roof. Shields remain aligned. The cold tonight is puttiaran, neither storm-driven nor gentle. It presses steadily but predictably. A curious detail sometimes overlooked is that sleeping at sea in freezing conditions would have been impossible without adaptation. If Vikings truly ignored cold, we would not see evidence of careful textile production, of specialized clothing, of ship design that prioritized flexible strength over mere aesthetics. Scholars continue to debate how much of the Viking reputation for toughness was self-cultivated image versus external exaggeration by later chroniclers. Christian monks who recorded raids often emphasized ferocity and otherness. That narrative hardened over time into legend. You exhale slowly and feel warmth gather beneath your cloak. There is nothing mystical about it. It is physics, body heat trapped by fiber and proximity. The sea moves gently beneath the hull. The stars shine without judgment. You realize that the real story of sleeping on longships is not one of indifference to cold, but of constant negotiation. Every night requires thought, adjustment, cooperation. No one simply lay down and ignored the elements. They prepared, they layered, they positioned shields, they angled sails, they chose landfall when possible. There is quiet dignity in that practicality. You close your eyes briefly and imagine a modern viewer expecting dramatic suffering or superhuman resilience. Instead, you picture the mundane reality. A man pulling his cloak tighter, another shifting closer to share warmth, someone waking for watch duty with the stiff joints and cold fingers. This is not spectacle, it is survival. The ship creaks softly. A rope taps against wood. Your breathing slows. You sense that the truth of freezing nights at sea lies in these small gestures repeated thousands of times across decades of voyages. And beyond myth and legend, there remains another human element shaping endurance. Age, youth, experience. Not everybody responds to cold in the same way. The seasoned sailor beside you may endure chill differently than a young recruit on his first voyage. Strength and resilience vary, adding another layer to the story of how Vikings slept without freezing. You begin to notice the differences in how bodies settle when night falls. Not everyone curls into the same compact shape. Not every face carries the same lines of endurance. Across from you, a young sailor lies stiffly on his sea chest shoulders, tense even in sleep. His hands remain half clenched as though still gripping an oar. The cold seems to surprise him each time a gust slips past the shield line. It's broadly accepted by historians that Viking crews included a range of ages. Young men seeking status or wealth often joined voyages, while older experienced sailors provided guidance and leadership. This mix of youth and age shaped not only daytime labour but nighttime resilience. You perhaps somewhere in the middle feel the cold as a steady pressure rather than a shock. Your body has learned the rhythm of wind and motion. The young recruit beside you has not. A subtle but fascinating detail from saga narratives describes teenage boys eager to prove themselves at sea. These stories often emphasize courage, yet beneath that bravery likely lay an experience with prolonged exposure and fragmented sleep. The older sailor near the stern shifts with practiced ease. His cloak is arranged perfectly, his hide positioned with care. Even in darkness, he adjusts instinctively when the wind changes direction. Researchers continue to explore how physical resilience varied with age in early medieval populations. Youth offers strength and quick recovery, but experience teaches conservation. The older body may move more slowly yet waste less energy. You watch as the younger sailor wakes briefly startled by a sudden tilt of the hull. He glances around disoriented, then pulls his cloak tighter. The older man beside him murmurs something reassuring and shifts closer, sharing warmth without ceremony. There is quiet mentorship even in sleep. A curious observation from modern longship reenactments suggests that first-time sailors often struggle most during initial nights at sea. The unfamiliar motion and constant exposure disrupt rest deeply. Over time, adaptation occurs. The nervous system recalibrates. You settle deeper into your own layered insulation and feel the steady warmth building around you. Your breathing matches the rhythm of the sea more naturally now. The cold does not vanish with age or experience, but the response changes. The seasoned sailor anticipates drafts before they reach his neck. He repositions his shield subtly when the wind veers. He rotates watch duties in ways that preserve strength. Scholars continue to examine how intergenerational knowledge transfer functioned aboard Viking ships. Skills were not written in manuals. They were demonstrated, observed, imitated. You recall how on your first voyage you may have underestimated the importance of dry wool or proper positioning against the hull. Perhaps you slept poorly for several nights before understanding how to tuck your cloak more effectively. The sea has been your teacher. Across the deck, the coughing man from earlier shifts in his sleep, but breathes more evenly now. Even illness interacts differently with age. The young may recover quickly, the older may endure more stubbornly. The sail above rustles softly. The shields hum faintly in passing wind. The hide beneath you remains dry and warm enough. You sense that freezing nights at sea are not faced uniformly. Each body negotiates differently. Youth fights the cold with restless energy. Age manages it with strategy. You adjust your position slightly and allow your shoulder to press more firmly against your neighbour's cloak. Shared heat does not discriminate by age. The stars arc slowly overhead. The longship continues its steady path. You close your eyes and reflect on how resilience grows quietly voyage by voyage. The first freezing night feels impossible. The 10th feels manageable. The 100th feels familiar. And as sleep claims you once more, you understand that beyond age and experience there is another dimension to these damn nights. The sounds themselves. The constant symphony of woodwater rope and breath that surrounds you in darkness. For the longship does not sleep silently. It sings and creaks and murmurs a soundscape that shapes how deeply you drift into rest. You begin to notice that the longship has its own voice. Not a single sound, but a layered chorus that never truly fades. Even when the crew lies still and the wind softens to a whisper, the vessel speaks in wood and rope and water. You lie back against your sea chest and close your eyes, letting the sounds rise into sharper focus. The hull emits a low rhythmic groan as it flexes gently with each swell. The overlapping planks shift almost imperceptibly against one another, iron rivets holding firm. It is firmly grounded in maritime archaeology that clinker-built ships were designed to flex rather than remain rigid. This flexibility allowed them to endure heavy seas without cracking apart. That same flexibility produces the subtle creaking that fills the night air. You listen to the faint hum of wind brushing along the shield line. Leather straps vibrate lightly. The angled sail rustles overhead, its wool fibres stirring with each change in breeze. There is also the soft slap of water against the hull. Not violent tonight, just steady. A repeated rhythm that echoes through wood into your bones. A small but fascinating observation from experimental voyages describes how sailors often report being lulled to sleep by this constant interplay of sound. What first seems intrusive becomes soothing through repetition. The brain begins to classify the creaks and slaps as familiar, non-threatening. You shift slightly and feel the hide beneath you whisper against the grain of your sea chest. The fabric of your cloak brushes your cheek with a dry rasp. Even your own breathing joins the chorus. Researchers continue to explore how ambient sound influences sleep quality. While Viking-age sailors would not have described their experience in such terms, the steady acoustic environment of a ship likely shaped their rest profoundly. You hear a rope knock softly against the mast in a predictable pattern. Tap, pause, map. The repetition becomes almost like a metronome. Scholars continue to examine how sensory adaptation functions in extreme environments. At first, constant noise can heighten alertness. Over time, the mind filters it into background. Only unusual deviations break through. You test this theory unconsciously. When a slightly sharper crack of wood snaps through the air, your eyes open immediately. Your body tenses for a fraction of a second. Then you recognize it as harmless part of the hull settling. A curious detail preserved in some saga descriptions recounts sailors interpreting unusual ship sounds as omens. A groan might signal displeasure from unseen forces. Whether literal belief or narrative embellishment, it reflects how closely they listen to their vessel. You turn your head slightly and focus on the breathing around you. Slow inhalations, soft exhalations, occasionally a faint snore. The shared warmth of clustered bodies blends with the shared soundscape. The creaking hull, the sighing sail, the murmur of waves, and the chorus of sleeping men form a single layered experience. The cold tonight feels manageable. The wind is moderate. The sail blocks its sharpest edge. Shields remain aligned. You allow the rhythm of the sea to guide your breathing. Inhale as the hull rises. Exhale as it settles. There is something profoundly calming in surrendering to this soundscape. You are no longer resisting it. You are part of it. A less discussed but intriguing point from maritime ethnography suggests that long-term sailors in many cultures develop a preference for the sound of moving water when sleeping. Silence on land can feel unsettling after weeks at sea. The brain associates the ocean's murmur with safety and continuity. You smile faintly at the thought. The very noise that might terrify someone unaccustomed to it now soothes you. The sail rustles once more. A distant seabird calls briefly in the dark. The rope taps gently against wood. You feel the hide beneath you warm steadily. The cloak around your shoulders holds heat close. The bodies beside you radiate quiet comfort. Freezing nights at sea are shaped not only by temperature but by atmosphere. Sound is part of that atmosphere. It can agitate or it can cradle. As your eyelids grow heavy again, the creaks and murmurs blend into a soft, continuous lullaby. And somewhere ahead lies the promise of home shores, where solid ground will replace rocking planks and indoor walls will replace sail and shield. The way you sleep there may feel strange at first after so many nights accompanied by the Longships' steady song. At first, it is only a subtle change in the air. The wind carries a faint scent of earth again, different from the raw salt of open water. The seabirds grow more numerous, their cries sharper and more frequent. Even the colour of the water shifts slightly, reflecting shallower depths beneath the hull. You lift your head from the hide and scan the horizon. A dark line appears there, steady and low. Not cloud, land. It is widely supported by historical evidence that Viking voyages often followed familiar coastal routes, returning seasonally to the same harbours and fjords. Home was not an abstract concept. It was a specific shoreline and known inlet, a settlement marked by wooden halls and rising smoke. The longship adjusts course gradually. The sail is trimmed to guide you toward the entrance of a fjord or harbour. The shields along the gunwales catch brighter light now as morning strengthens. You feel something inside you loosen. The cold of recent nights seems less oppressive in the presence of nearing land. A small but telling observation from saga accounts suggests that returning crews were often greeted by community members watching from shore. The sight of a familiar ship cresting the horizon carried emotional weight, relief, anticipation, pride. As the hull glides into calmer waters near shore, the rocking softens. The waves diminish to gentle ripples. The soundscape changes from deep ocean rhythm to the quieter lapping of enclosed bays. Researchers continue to examine how repeated voyages shaped sailors' relationship with home environments. After weeks of open exposure, indoor spaces might feel both comforting and strangely confined. Adaptation works in both directions. The keel brushes shallower water. Men leap over the side to guide the ship onto familiar sand or gravel. Ropes are secured to posts or rocks along the shore. You step onto land once more, knees slightly uncertain after prolonged motion. The ground feels almost too solid, too still. Smoke rises from distant hearths. The scent of burning wood replaces the tang of tar and salt. You inhale deeply, noticing how the air feels thicker, warmer somehow. A curious detail from ethnographic studies of sailors in many cultures reveals that sleep patterns often shift when returning to land. Some struggle with the absence of rocking motion, others sleep more deeply in enclosed warmth. You imagine entering a timber hall or a modest house, walls shielding you fully from wind. A central hearth glows. Thick bedding lies prepared. The contrast with the longship deck is stark. No need to angle sails for shelter. No need to align shields against gusts. The roof above does not rustle. It holds steady. Scholars continue to discuss how domestic architecture in Viking Age Scandinavia evolved to manage cold. Longhouses with central hearths allowed heat to circulate effectively. Sleeping platforms along walls benefited from residual warmth rising from the fire. You sit near the hearth and feel heat penetrate layers of wool effortlessly. The need for compact positioning disappears. You can stretch your legs fully without concern for balance. Yet as night falls and you lie upon thicker bedding indoors, you notice something unexpected. The silence. No creaking hull, no steady slap of waves, no rope tapping against mast. The stillness feels almost unnatural at first. Your body, accustomed to motion, remains faintly alert, waiting for a tilt that never comes. You turn onto your side and listen to the quiet crackle of hearth embers. It is a different soundscape, gentler, less rhythmic. Freezing nights at sea have reshaped your perception of comfort. What once felt harsh now feels familiar. What once seemed ordinary now feels luxurious. You close your eyes and allow sleep to take you fully in this grounded warmth. The memory of wool layered carefully against cold wind lingers, but the urgency has faded. You understand now that survival aboard a longship did not require superhuman endurance. It required adaptation, cooperation, and an intimate understanding of material and environment. As you drift into deeper rests sheltered by walls and warmed by fire, the sea remains beyond the fjord, waiting. And though you are home for now, you know that in time the sail will rise again. The shields will line the gunwales, the deck will narrow beneath your feet, for the rhythm of departure and return shapes not only journeys but the very way you learn to sleep against freezing wind and endless dark. In time, the memory of solid walls and hearth fire softens at the edges, and you find yourself once more drawn back to the deck of the longship. The wood feels familiar beneath your palm. The scent of tar and salt returns like an old companion. The sail hangs ready. Shields line the gunwales in their curved procession. The sea stretches outward, dark and immense. You step into your place beside your sea chest and realize how much you have learned without noticing. It is firmly grounded in historical understanding that Viking expansion across the North Atlantic depended not on reckless bravery alone, but on repeatable systems. Ship design, textile production, watch rotation, landfall strategy. These were not random acts of endurance, they were structured responses to a harsh environment. You lower yourself onto the hide, spread across your chest, and adjust it with practiced ease. You know now to keep it clear of pooling moisture. You know how to angle your cloak to block a draft. You know how to shift closer when the temperature dips. A small but revealing detail from maritime reconstruction suggests that after several voyages, sailors move with quiet efficiency aboard ship, minimizing unnecessary exposure and conserving energy. Habit becomes shield. The sail is lowered partially as dusk settles. Its woolen mass creates that familiar slanted roof overhead. The shields block the wind along your side, the oars are secured. The deck narrows into a shared sleeping field. Researchers continue to discuss whether Viking crews viewed such nights as routine hardship or as constant trial. The evidence suggests that normalization plays a powerful role. What first shocks becomes ordinary. You draw your cloak around you and press your shoulder lightly against the person beside you. No ceremony, no embarrassment, just shared warmth. The stars ignite overhead one by one. The horizon fades into shadow. You feel the cold begin its patient advance. It presses against your cheek and neck, probing for weakness. But you are prepared. Layered wool traps heat close to your skin. The hide beneath you interrupts the drain of warmth into wood. The sail above diverts wind. Shields along the gunwales soften gusts. Bodies clustered together amplify shared heat. It's a network of simple decisions. A curious observation from environmental physiology ensued that shows that humans can maintain core temperature in surprisingly cold conditions when insulated effectively and supported by social proximity. The principle is timeless. It does not require modern terminology to function. You close your eyes briefly and listen to the soundscape. The hull creaks softly. Water murmurs along planks. A rope taps against mast. The breathing of those around you slows. Scholars continue to examine how cultural narratives about Viking toughness sometimes obscure the collaborative nature of their survival. It was not individual heroics that kept sailors alive through freezing nights. It was communal strategy. You exhale slowly and feel warmth gather within your layered cocoon. There is no fire aboard tonight, no enclosed cabin, no mattress, yet you are not freezing. You have learned to negotiate with wind rather than curse it, to anticipate dampness and dry when possible, to eat well when supplies allow storing warmth within, to rotate watch so that no one bears cold alone for too long. The longship moves steadily beneath you, its flexible hull absorbing each swell. You sense how each element contributes: wood, wool, fur, sail, shield, breath. You drift deeper now, no longer startled by every tilt of the deck. The motion has become cradle rather than threat. Freezing nights at sea are not conquered, they're endured through knowledge, and as your breathing lengthens and the stars continue their silent arc overhead, you feel the cold settle into manageable distance, present but restrained, though restrained. The longship glides onward through darkness, carrying you across water that once seemed impossible to cross. You rest not because the sea has softened, but because you have adapted. The wind brushes the sail, the shields hum faintly, the hull creaks in patient rhythm, and slowly, gently you drift into sleep beneath the northern sky. Now let your breathing slow even further. The ship beneath you continues its quiet motion, steady and reassuring. The cold remains outside your layered cocoon, softened by woolhide and the warmth of those nearby. Imagine the stars above dimming slightly as a thin veil of cloud passes overhead. The wind eases. The sail settles into near stillness. The shields no longer hum with gusts but rest in quiet alignment. Your body feels heavy now, supported by wood that no longer feels harsh, by fur that holds gentle warmth, by shared breath rising and falling in calm unison. The sea is no longer an adversary. It is a rhythm beneath you, a cradle of slow, even motion. You do not need to adjust your cloak. You do not need to listen for change. The watch is kept. The course is steady. In this moment, you are simply part of the ship, part of the night, part of the soft chorus of creaks and murmurs that carry you forward. The cold air brushes your face but does not disturb you. It is a familiar touch now, a quiet reminder of where you are. The longship glides beneath a sky vast and patient. The stars fade gently as dawn begins to think about returning. You remain still, warm, safe enough, suspended between sea and sky. And as the final trace of wakefulness slips away, you drift fully into rest, carried by wood and wool and whispered wind. Sweet dreams.